Welcome to Fast Friends, the podcast that centers on high performance storytelling with high performance athletes and individuals whose norm is to live at the very top 0.01%, whether it's competition, coaching, business, or life. We dive into their stories, how they got there, the journey, and life on the other side. I'm your host, Dan Walsh, and I'm joined by my co host, Justin Faber. Justin and I were rowing teammates in college and later on the U.S. national team. Though we went on separate journeys, since then we've come together to bring these stories to life and share perspectives with our audience as well as our guests. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Fast Friends. We are super excited for today's guest. We're super excited because today is our 10th episode, and we're really excited because you've been asking us to keep doing them. So a huge thank you to everyone that's been watching and following. And to make Steve happy, please like, please subscribe, please share. Today's guest really doesn't need an introduction. He truly is a fast friend, but he may be the fastest of all of us. That is both in terms of speed, time in, and just his raw ability to, on race day, get over the line first. I feel like he knows no one does not need an introduction, but it would be not fair to have Justin not be able to talk up this one friend of mine, Bryan Volpenhein. Bryan, dude, it is so cool to have you on the show, to be number 10, and to really just impart the amount of wisdom that you have about American rowing. So thanks for being on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm very excited. I've been watching all the episodes, so it's been really interesting and fun, and I'm very excited to share my story and some thoughts and relive all these fun times we had together.
No worries.
Well, without further ado, my main man, Justin, my co-host, and Luke and Steve, our emotional support animals. Let's rock and roll, Justin. Let's let the audience know who they're talking to.
Yeah, no, super. Thanks, Dan. And obviously super excited to have Volp on. Full transparency. Yes, this is our 10th episode, but I would say you were probably on the sketch sheet shortlist very quickly when we were like, who should we get when we, hatched the show? So you were certainly, within the first, line or two of our kind of quick notes or texts, I guess I should say, between Dan and I. So yeah, thrilled to have you on, Volp. Obviously, for those that don't know you, just obviously we'll give you a quick background on who we're talking to today. So Bryan, is from Ohio. Began his rowing career at Ohio State University. He graduated there in 2002 with a degree in philosophy. He went to 3 Olympics. He was a 10-time national team member. He was a 2-time athlete of the year for U.S. rowing. He was a 3-time world champion. Not in sequential order, so 98, 99, 2005. He was a Division I collegiate coach. He was a national team coach. And he also has a degree in culinary arts from the Art Institute of Seattle. That's a very micro bio compared to what we're going to unpack. But there's a lot of range. There's a lot of stretch in who Bryan is. And yeah, without any more delay, like, we're just psyched to have you on. Like I said, you were probably, if not the first name out of our mouths, probably within the top 3 names out of our mouths of who, if we're going to do the show, who do we need to get on? So yeah, we're stoked that you're episode 10, and yeah, let's fire it up, Danny.
All right. So, I mean, Bryan, I think my first real interaction, my first real kind of interaction and getting to know you, I think from the friendship side was, there was that American Heroes poster that was around every college in the late 90s, early 2000s. And, just watching the buildup of that U.S. men's 8 from 97, 98, 99. And sometime around 2001, he came up to Boston and he stayed with me. And I think that's where we started really become friends. And I realized that there was such a methodical way that you approached rowing that I was really surprised about, because the persona of how invincible you were leading up to that Sydney Games to me is really important. And so when I got to know you, hearing your story and feeling just so connected to what it was like for you to be this walk on, right? Because, like, to me, knowing that you are, for lack of a better word, our Jordan, right? You're our Michael Jordan, and where Jordan is NBA's Bryan Volpenhein. So,
That's, yeah.
um, to know how you started is really important because it is not traditional at all. You started at Ohio State, which wasn't even a Division I men's program. It was a club, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And did you focus on eights?
Yeah, yeah, it was a big program when I started, mostly eights. We did fours and eights
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
So,
How did they get you? Like, how did they get you to show up?
yeah,
Good question. They didn't really recruit me. I saw a flyer advertising the crew team on my tour that I went on with my mom on campus somewhere, and I grabbed it and I kept it. And then when I got in and I went to school there, I was sitting around the dorm room. I had remembered it, and I was sitting around the dorm room, doing things what college guys do, and just drinking beers and watching TV. And I had like it just remembered. I was like, oh yeah, the crew meeting is tonight, and then I should go. And then luckily the boathouse was across the street from my dorm, so me and one of my roommates, he's like, oh, I saw the flyer, I'll go with you. So we went down and went to the meeting, and that was how I got basically started. Yeah.
prior to that,
What
though,
captivated you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Justin.
yeah, but before so you're from Ohio.
Yeah.
I want to just for like foundational real quick. You're from what part of Ohio? Just
I'm
curious.
I'm from Cincinnati, just north of Cincinnati,
Okay.
right by Kings Island, if anybody knows that amusement park.
Okay. Shout out to the Ohio natives. The Buckeyes can comment in the comments about that one. I have
Yeah.
no idea. That said, but you know, so obviously Ohio State looms large, right? I know a number of people that went to Ohio State. Huge football school, right? Like, were you an athlete like growing up, like, or was it just simply like you're like, oh, that seems interesting. I'll try the rowing thing. Because we've had a number of people on the show who were walk-ons that were like, hey, I was a runner, I was a swimmer, right? But
Mhm.
you know, usually like I never touched an vision to touch an oar until epiphany happened. So I just wanted to understand, like, Bo was a golfer, right? So like, just curious, did you do any organized athletics, or were you just like straight up like, hey, I went to college and then I saw this flyer?
Oh no,
So when
yeah,
you're
sorry.
like high school years, like, were you in organized athletics at all, or just straight up like the first time you were an athlete was when you got to Ohio State?
No, I played soccer and baseball growing up,
Yeah. Okay.
from like when I was a little kid,
Mhm.
and all the way. I played soccer all the way through high school and baseball all the way till my junior year. I was really bad at baseball, but I loved it. If I could pick any sport to be a pro at, it'd be baseball.
Okay.
Um, and then my senior year, some friends and I got into beach volleyball, which is random in Ohio, but there's
Yeah.
another water park there called the Beach, and they had sand volleyball courts, and so we started playing there. And then we started my high school volleyball team.
Okay.
Four of us and our librarian, who was our coach, started that team. I was also in the marching band in high school. Like, I did band, and I played the saxophone, and I did band until like starting in fifth grade all the way
Okay.
through high school.
Got it.
So yeah, a lot of organized sports. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I was looking to do something at Ohio State. My goal was to try to join the volleyball team, Ohio State's volleyball team, but they were very good, and I was not very good at volleyball.
Got it.
And that's and then once rowing got its hooks in me, I was done. Like, once I went to that first meeting, I knew that that's what I was going to do.
Okay, so yeah, we'll pick it up
Yeah.
from there, Dan. So we'll pick it up there.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to hear the kind of like maturation story of athletics, because it runs the gamut. And the four of us were all high school rowers, all recruited to go row. So it was a very interesting dynamic. It's always an interesting dynamic for us to kind of unpack, like, the walk-on story and how that evolves into where it kind of, blossoms to. So
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it's also
thanks.
interesting because like we had the walk-on story in high school, right? Like
Yeah.
not that we didn't walk on, but we walked on in high school.
Right.
And
14 years
then-
old. Yeah.
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 And then when you're having like when you're going to a university of, 20, 30,000 people and that somebody finds you and taps you on the shoulder and is like, or slips a flyer under your door or what have you, like, that it's different and cool.
Yeah. So
Well, the other thing too is interesting is you growing up outside of Cincinnati is that U.S. rowing really tried to push Cincinnati as a rowing mecca for a while. Um, the collegiate national championships were out of there on Lake Hershey, and you did have a training center there for a while. And I think in downtown Cincinnati on the river, there's like rowing tanks and stuff. So did you have any awareness of rowing growing up in high school? Was it in your zeitgeist, or was it not until Ohio State that it really became part of your sphere?
Not until Ohio State. I played with
Okay.
I played club soccer in the summers with a kid who was on the Cincinnati junior team, the high school team, but I didn't know that and really know him until after I kind of found that flyer and got to Ohio State and started thinking about it. And that's kind of the only person I knew anything about rowing with. And I had no idea that the training center thing was there. I had no idea about Lake Harsha. None of that was ever on my radar. Like I had no idea growing up what rowing was. But after I got to Ohio State, and I started to learn more, I started to row. That's where I would do my training over winter break. Is I would go down, I would drive the 25 minutes from my house to the boathouse, which is but it's under a restaurant, Montgomery Ribs. It's like a famous
That's amazing.
Yeah.
famous
I remember that.
Cincinnati ribs joint. And so underneath, that's where they would let me erg in there. And so that's what I would do on my breaks.
Yeah. And
And
I wonder if that has anything to do with your eventual, when we get there, your culinary journey, right? Just smelling ribs
Yeah,
while
just
you're
like
smelling ribs while
culinary.
you're erging.
If that's
Yeah.
not motivation, I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. These two are connected.
So,
Yeah.
so I
Can
think,
you can you
I think,
weave us before we go too far down there? Can you weave us like a picture of like what did Ohio State club
Sure.
rowing look like when you
Yeah.
showed up? Because obviously like especially those like the high school rowers when they're looking at programs like now the landscape is a lot of established like Division 1 teams. There's a Division 3 national championship. So like kind of weave us like the the Accra landscape, the what did it look like, we're sharing space,
Yeah,
Let's-
so well, I guess some funny stories there. So yeah, so the boathouse was actually in the basement of, it's not really a boathouse, but they call it a boathouse because that's where they kept their canoes that they would rent out to the students. So it's in the theater, it's underneath the theater department, and it was in between these two giant towers. You may have seen them on TV if you've seen an Ohio State football game. The two big towers by the football stadium, those are two dorms. And I lived in one of those. And then the student union, the theater department and a student union was right across the street. And so it was in the basement. And so you would walk in these doors, you'd go down this really kind of dimly lit hallway, and you'd get to the end, and to the right, there was a bowling alley and a bar. So you're like looking that way, and then there's this giant steel door, really heavy steel door with a little, window in it. And that was the entrance to the boathouse. And so you walk in, there's another short hallway, and it's all concrete, by the way. And there's another short hallway, and at the end of that hallway is a giant floor to ceiling cage. Where that's where like the person worked that like checked out the canoes. And you go down a few stairs, and it was a big long room, one big open long concrete room. And you went in, and to the left was where all the boats were, and they were literally on the outside, like on the wall, like the outer wall, but inside, right, of the building. And so it was just a wall of eights. and at the far end was like their trophies or whatever, and then their oars were down there, so that's all you could see. And then tucked away in one of the corners was their ergs and a couple squat racks, and I mean it's pretty bare bones.
Coffee cans, maybe some cement coffee can weights.
Yeah, a lot of those, a lot of like.
I mean, don't laugh. I mean, we had that at Northeastern, coffee can weights. It's universal.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, they
had
work.
them.
Yeah.
yeah.
The
Folgers equals 40 pounds, right?
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know if it's still good or bad that those things still exist, truthfully.
That's another episode. Keep going.
Yeah, no worries. And so then that's where you kind of like had a little locker area, changing area. You had your ergs over there, and you had they had like a makeshift. It looked like somebody made it out of parts they got at a hardware store. It was like a 3-road cycling spinner. You know, the tracks you can ride on that don't have any railings.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was, and people were on that all the time. It was sketchy. So that was going on. They had a big rowing simulator with 2 giant computer monitors next to it. That and I figured out this later, but one of the guys, an Ohio State alum, helped design it and build it. I think they only sold 2 ever. And I actually think Northeastern had one.
Yeah, we did.
And so we had one
Very
of those.
finicky.
And so, and it was all downhill. Everything was sloped downhill to the water. So you would erg downhill. And so that was kind of the environment you were in. And to get the boats out, there was just one big garage door, and you had to kind of, tuck the boat into the corner, the bow into the corner, and then swing the stern back, and then cant it, and then pull it back between 2 giant concrete pillars without banging it, and then get the bow pointed out of the boat, out of the bay, and then walk out. And then there's a railing in your way, so you had to kind of like arch your back as you're walking by the railing. And then you got it, and then you got out and you got down to the docks. So that was like the environment that you walked into. And my first meeting that I went to that got me hooked, it was like 100 and some people there. It must have been 150 people there, and just packed, full of people interested in rowing. And then they had, what was cool is that they had the coaches there, they had, current athletes there, and then they had, recent grads who had just, were doing a 5th year, finishing school that quarter, and, we're also helping out coaching. And so there's a lot of energy in the room and a lot of just good vibes, and you just had a sense that like, oh, this could be a fun place to spend my time. We also shared the space with LARPers, which back then we didn't really know them as LARPers. But every Thursday, the whole right half of the boathouse was like roped off, and you had a whole group of people come down and just beating the crap out of each other with sticks and homemade armor. And it was pretty amazing place.
Was that part of the theater department, or was that just
Yeah, probably
another club on campus?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
That's I mean, so
that's amazing. Thank you for painting a very vivid picture for me.
fascinating.
The awesome part is like so much time
I
we've
banged my hand on the
together.
wall trying to get the boat out in that story, just thinking about it. So
Yeah,
like we spent
was a
so
lot
much
of fun.
time together, and somehow this is the first I've heard that story. I love it.
Yeah.
Like that's what's fun about this pod is like you're hearing these stories.
I mean, I'm still hooked on the flyer, right? Like here
Yeah,
you
I
are.
wanna
You
know,
get this
yeah.
like this flyer that you saw on your visit. And so I think that's to me the really incredible part that we found is, and I also love how you use the words, once rowing gets your hooks into you. Carrie Simmons was on, and her episode should be going live soon. And she talked about, she literally went like, once rowing gets you, she like acted like a big cat, like just getting its claws into you. And so I think there's this visceral reaction that rowing, I don't think people choose rowing. I think rowing chooses people.
Yeah.
And I'm really intrigued, especially just now knowing, like, what was that flyer that drew you in? Like, what did you see in that flyer that made you say, hey, I need to do this? Because knowing we're going to go with this story and being in a boat with you, and for what you have done for American rowing is just like, thank God for that flyer.
Mhm.
And
I
so I'd
wish I
love to
still
know.
had it.
Yeah, but like, what
But
did you see in it?
I remember exactly what it was like. I'll never forget the picture. It was like kind of genius marketing, actually. It was just a picture of an 8 from the stern, and it just at the bottom in big block letters, like the Ohio State font, it just said Ohio State Crew. And then in really small letters, it had a date and a location, or like for the meeting. And that's all it was. But the picture of the stern of the 8, it was a close-up shot. And so you just saw the back of the coxswain's head, you saw the stroke seat's face, and you saw the 7 seat's face. And then everything else was just, it was all the oars, like the symmetry of the oars coming down, and you saw the stern deck, the coxswain, rower. And there was something about the symmetry of it and the simplicity of it and the the look on their faces that I think got me. It was like there was an intensity to it, like a focus to it, and it just looked cool. And that's what I mean. I was like, that looks like could be really fun. And
That's
so
incredible.
that's kind of like what it was. I
And so
saved it. My mom might have it somewhere.
I'm sure somebody has it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure Ohio State Sports Information Department has an archive. It'd be fun to find.
Yeah, it would be.
But that, so that call to action, that, that stoicism that you kind of define of like the intensity, but the symmetry. And you went to school to study philosophy as well, correct?
Well, I didn't go to study,
Well,
but I
well,
ended up studying
but you
that.
ended up studying. Yeah, well, so
I didn't
I
really go
think
to
that's,
school to study anything. I just
yeah.
went.
And look, you just missed it by a year. We all went to school to row, and studying was the way to do it. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, stupid. But what I love it, so you fell in love with that flyer, and then you started to just really see the community aspect of rowing.
Mhm.
I love the idea of that energy. I love the idea that you were part of maybe what was the last generation of great walk-ons in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so once you got your hooks into it, you had to be surprised, or maybe you weren't, of the intensity that it takes just to participate in rowing. So can you take us a little bit of that, and like, how did you adapt to that part of the sport?
Well, I think I was on a very good high school soccer team. Like we were, it was very competitive. We had our coach was a former football player at OU, at Ohio University, and then married a British woman and got into soccer, and then started coaching soccer. And so my last 2 years of high school soccer on the varsity team, we went 16-0, a bunch of shutouts, like 16 shutouts each year. And so we're just a highly competitive team. And so I love to compete, and I love that environment. And he created that coach, like his name is Scott Downer. He created this like really sort of high performance environment in the sense of the mentality of it. Like I remember there being a big giant sign over the exit that just of our locker room that just said no complacency. Is huge. And so every day you leave to go to practice, that's what you're thinking about. And he always had us like competing. And we would get jerseys from different European teams, and we would compete as those teams against each other. So there was always, I love the competition of it. And so when I started rowing practices, I actually don't even remember learning to row like that. I can't even recall those memories. Like I don't remember my first time in the boat. I don't remember my first time taking a stroke. The only thing I remember from my freshman year is obviously the friends that I made and the people, but I remember running, and I remember burpees, and I remember stadiums, and we used to run the tower, the dorms that I lived in, which was like 24 floors. So that's all I remember. And I just loved all of that, because the runs were basically from campus, and it was like a 2-mile run or maybe a little bit more, but it was like basically out into this neighborhood and back. And so just competing that, and because I was a fast runner back then. So that was really fun. And then it just was something that that environment, I thrived in. It was just fun to be around people that wanted to like work hard and compete and, try to have fun doing it and not take themselves too seriously, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just, so you have one of the most unique physiologies in rowing, I think, in terms of like when we look at the metrics and you look at the data that Fritz would share with us, having those 7-liter lungs and kind of knowing that you come back from that soccer background and learning about that intensity that starts to really draw a lot of clarity to the type of athlete that we're going to get to know. Because as you adapt to that training and you like to compete, did you start to become a leader on that team pretty quickly because of your physicality and your ability to, because I have to imagine, knowing what I experienced competing against you, to be in a boat with you, you must have level jumped at Ohio State pretty quickly. Or was it not? Were there other guys there that were able to push you?
I think, I don't know if I would say I became a leader. I do think my physical abilities and the capabilities that I had, with my genetics and physically definitely helped. I think it was mostly just that, like, I really, really, really enjoyed my time there more than anything else I did at Ohio State. And so I think what it was is when I showed up, I was all in. I was all in every day. Like I did extra, like I just was always there and encouraging people to go there and like be at practice and, do weights together and do all that extra stuff. And so, and you found a lot of friends that way. So I think helped. But also the other thing that happened is that, like the majority of the senior class quit for some reason that year. Well, I don't know. I still don't know why. I can't remember why, but yeah, they just all like left. There was only 2 or 3 seniors left. And so the varsity team got decimated. And so after the end of my novice year, they called up the top 2 or 3 novices, and we ended up making the varsity and rowing at the varsity that year, which actually happened to me as on the national team too, like a little bit later. So that kind of jumped it a little bit. And then I got to know those guys and the seniors and the upperclassmen that stuck around and stuck with it. Those guys were the real leaders, and they were like, it was the 90s. It was different back then. They seemed older. They seemed more mature and bigger than me. Like the guys that would show up and do their ergs and cut off jeans and work boots and then put their flannel shirt back on and leave,
That's so awesome.
and
That's so awesome.
that
So
kind of,
awesome.
you were just around a lot of those kind of people. And it was a lot of different people, a lot of people from different backgrounds, and it was just it was unique.
Yeah,
So
I mean that sounds,
I think I
that's
fit
super
into that.
unique.
I think I fit into that environment pretty well. And so I don't think I was really a leader on the team, and I actually don't even know if I did a very good job being a leader on that team when I think back on it now. But I probably not till my junior year.
Yeah, I mean that's cool. And I think explaining that environment too. I love the idea of the guys just showing up and doing the work, and what good role models there are, especially in the sport of rowing. Just to say, yeah, they're showing up and doing the work.
Yeah.
So that's really, so you become a top novice, and so this is 1997, 98.
96, the fall of 96, like 96, 97. No, sorry. 94. 94, 95.
So when do you start to notice that there's this thing called the U.S. national team, and they may or may not be interested in you?
Yeah, that was part of my question too, is like, when do you start to like separate out from those older guys, or did that even happen, right? Like, because like 1994, 95, I gotta imagine Ohio State rowing, and not, obviously a very committed group of guys and gals, but like not necessarily on the radar, right? Of like a lot of, mega rowing programs at that time. So yeah, to Dan's point, like, when does this little bug start flying around?
I'd say not really until my junior year.
Okay.
But there's a backstory to it. And some of you guys I
Please
may have
tell
told
us.
this
Yes.
to you before, but there was a kid at Ohio State, a friend of mine, good friend of mine on the team. He was an upperclassman, who was making up his ERG scores, but nobody knew until much, much later.
Okay.
And so there was an honor system. So you had a big chalkboard in the boathouse, and you had to come down during the testing days at some point during the day and like do your 2K and write up your score. I mean, you talk about the trust that the coaches had in us to do that. So anyway, he was a lightweight, but he was like the strongest guy in the boathouse, fastest guy in the boathouse, like good rower, had rowing experience in high school. Like he just kind of was, and he was a very intense person. Like he was just a fun guy to be around. He wrote up 556. And so this is 96 at this point. And I had no idea what that meant. I was like, I got 40, 50 pounds in this guy. I should be able to beat him. And so I just set out to do it. I was like, that's my goal. That's what I'm going to do. And I got there by my junior year. And by that point, like, so along that path, like trying to get to that 556, I started to, my erg started to come down a little bit. I was like, I broke my first 2K was like 6:57 or over 7 minutes or around there. And then it started to come down into the 30s. And then
I think that was your VO2 in 08 too. Your VO2 test score.
That was my VO, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so, hold on, where was I? Oh, so
sorry.
it started to come down,
your
and then
scores are descending. Yep.
So they're coming down, and I'm like a 6'11" at one point, I think. And then we show up to do a team test. Everybody's going to do it together, and there's girls there. The women's team is there. So like I'm basically just show off, and I went 6:03 or 6:02.9 or something like that, and that got me an invite to Crash Bees.
Okay.
Oh no! It was like that got me where I was like, okay, this is a big jump, and I think this is good. And then I went to the Cincinnati Erg Sprints that year, and then I went 6:01.9. That's what it was. And then that got me the invite where they paid my flight, my hotel, my family came to the Crash Bee, and then at that Crash Bee, I went 5:55, and that's kind of when I got noticed.
So that was 96, 97.
Yeah, 97, 96.
Right?
Yeah. And that,
yeah. Okay.
So that was, and then the other funny thing about that is that was post Atlanta, right? And so all these guys had retired, and but Nike was still a sponsor. So I'm sitting on my couch. By this point, I have like a roommate with a house with the rowers, and we're all living together. And we're sitting on the couch, and this big giant package comes to my doorstep. It was probably 4 feet by, this giant box, almost up to my waist. And it was just packed with Nike gear, shoes, jackets, shirts, hoodies, tracksuits, like all kinds of Nike gear. And I was like, shit, this might be worth it. I might get some out of this.
It's all about the gear, baby. It's all about the gear.
I know that would be the last. Yeah, like
nice gear package you ever got.
Yeah, it's like the nicest I've ever got. And then funny story is, fast forward like 3 years later, I caught Tatey. He stole my shoes, and I caught him wearing them one day that I got in that box.
That's funny.
Yeah,
that's funny. So, I mean, I think that's incredible. It's a really cool through line too of like talking to the walk-ons that are of our level versus some of the junior rowers, and we're, there's an advantage to being a junior rower in a certain standpoint, but there's also a disadvantage. And I think the newness of finding rowing as an adult, and you and I have talked about that, is you're able to have a lot of fun with it, right? Because you're seeing that progress over the 4 years. And I think reliving that through one life cycle as a junior rower, you have to kind of have a rebirth, a Phoenix moment. But the other really cool thing about it, and I think that identification, right? That I I do miss the beauty of what the Crash Bee did of like having those qualifiers from those small places where you got rewarded for truly being brave, for truly going out there and saying, I want to be excellent, and I don't,
Mhm.
and I want to be excellent in rowing. And you go to Crash Bees, you get that box, and 97 comes around, and now you're actually being invited.
Yeah.
Correct? I think that's
Yeah.
the big Elkhart camp, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah. So that Crash Bee Erg got me invited. So that happened. And then that year, that summer, we won we got a silver at the IRA in the Cox Four. And that's when clubs were allowed to go to the IRA, which I think was part of the reason why club rowing back then and why there were so much more walk-ons that kind of made it all the way up is that club rowers got to compete against the best in the country, and then it sort of raised their level. And so it's just much harder for club rowers now to have that motivation. So
that chance to be a national champion or compete for it, and the different disciplines too. I think back then, and that's a different subject for another time. But
so
I
did
think,
you?
Yeah.
Sorry, real quick. Did you win Crash Bees with that 555, or were you on the podium? Like,
I got third in the collegiate
okay, because
division.
I mean that's pretty quick at that time, if I'm recalling some of the numbers.
Yeah, it was. So that I came up the same time Garrett Miller did, who was going
Okay.
like 542. So
Yeah.
kind of screwed me there. And then Sture, he was like a Norwegian rower that rowed. Where was he, at Jacksonville or something?
Yeah, and then ended up at Cal.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So he got second. So
Okay.
Garrett won. And then there's a picture of me somewhere where I'm just on the podium next to these two giants. And I'm just like this. I have like cut off sleeves on a shirt that I
work boots and jean shorts.
Flannel.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
From their
the
store.
Ohio State uniform. Yeah.
I'm
Oh, yeah.
still kind of uncomfortable in spandex in public, that kind of
fair
stuff.
enough. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just was curious because obviously, that's all in the mail, especially at that time. So all good. Yep.
Yeah.
So what did it feel like being kind of an unknown? You're standing next to Garrett Miller, who, again, what a great athlete to reference at that time, knocking on the door of low 540s when that was still such a rare number. International competition, so people that are from different countries at this point. And you get asked to go to Elkhart. And what did that transition feel like to you, to kind of go from like, I'm a club rower, to I am a silver medalist at the national championships, to I'm maybe going to represent my country?
It mostly felt empowering, I guess I would say. And exciting, and I felt like a level of freedom there, that like I had a direction in my life that I hadn't really had before. As like, out of high school kind of adult, you had, you're in high school, you have all these things and plans and dreams and all that, and then all of a sudden you graduate high school and you're like, holy shit, life is right at me right now. And so like I didn't know what I was going to do, and school wasn't going well for me. Like I didn't really like studying, and and it wasn't easy for me. So I think it gave me a sense of like freedom and excitement. Like, this is what I'm going to go do, and I'm committed to it, and I don't really care what happens. I just know that this is what I'm going to do. And I remember like we had to drive to Elkhart. I had to get myself there. That was the only expense I had. And so I was driving an 87 Comanche truck from Ohio to Elkhart, Indiana. And just, by myself, I had my CD book just on my lap, just putting all the CDs in the thing. My brother had installed like two 12-inch woofers behind the seat, so the whole thing was just vibrating like the whole way down the highway. And I just remember being super excited that whole drive. And like when I got there, it was like, you're rowing out of somebody's driveway that lives on the river, and you're staying at a host family, and it just was like everybody was so nice and welcoming that it just felt like, this is my people, and this is what I want to do, and this is what I need to do. And so it just felt liberating.
That's so cool.
That's awesome.
to think about something that is so demanding to be liberating is such an awesome perspective. That's such an incredible perspective. And I'd love to now kind of start to shift into, because now you're fighting for a spot for the red, white, and blue.
Mhm.
And we all know how kind of difficult that is, even when you're good. And even when you have the physiology, and now you're getting dumped into a cohort that is more homogenous to your physiology. It's not just like it's you competing day in, day out with the guys that you were on the podium with, like the Crash Bees. And I think what I'd love to know next is, as we learn more about how you go from that position to eventually being one of, if not the greatest American male oarsman, is when did you start to know you had this mindset, this high performance mindset, that you knew you could be great? You know, Akil talked about it as like there was a delusion that he's like, I'm going to be an Olympian. And even though it was still so far from that moment, or I want to be the best in the world. So when did that mindset start to creep into you? Was it before Elkhart? Was it out Elkhart? Was it after? I'd love to know when that came in.
I would say it was well after Elkhart. I would say it
Okay.
wasn't until the lead up to Athens, maybe 03, where even the concept of high performance came into my mind. You know, it was like, especially in Elkhart, like when I showed up at that camp, it was like, I'm going to do whatever the coach says. I'm going to watch the people around me. I'm going to follow whatever they do. And I'm just going to get in everybody I'm going to get. I'm just going to match the person I'm with. That's the only thing I cared about. And it was like day to day. It was like, just survive every day. And, you know, have fun doing it. And I didn't really think about anything other than the rowing and the people. I mean, that's really what I thought about. And, you know, living up to like the standard of like what the people that invited me there and the coaches and all the other athletes that were there from all over the country, it was like, I just was happy to be there. And, you know, just to see if I could hang, basically. So, yeah, it wasn't until much later that any concept of like what high performance is, or like what it means, that even came into my mind.
And that's including, because after Elkhart, you get dropped into the U.S. men's 8
Yeah.
and win,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's an amazing,
I think
amazing
that's
to
the
hear.
remarkable part of this story right now, is the fact that like
Yeah.
it's not even crossing your mind, and yeah, you're winning world championships. I mean, you're jumping over a few world championships without even this mindset in your, you know, in your repertoire, from what you're saying. And, you know,
Maybe.
yeah, I mean, yeah, there's got to be so maybe let's back out of high performance a little bit then. Like,
Yeah.
when did you, like, if I guess the way to put it is like, and by the way, it's not dissimilar to a lot of other people's experiences, including, you know, most of the people on this show, that it was just like, we're just happy to be here. Like, you're looking around, you're like, oh, there's that guy, there's that guy. Like, oh, I saw him on a poster. AK, you were that for me when I got there. And so it's like, oh, there's Volp. Like, I've seen him on a poster. But shit, I'm gonna cox him today. But I think that that's cool. But no, I think that there's an interesting element of like, you mentioned the like no complacency, right? Like,
Mhm.
is that carrying through? Obviously, like, you know, that is that still carrying through, or is it just like, I know that if I pull hard and like you said, you match the guy in front of you stroke for stroke, like, and just do what they tell me, like, things could work out. I'm fully committed. I think the interesting piece too is like, we didn't talk about with a walk-on experience versus a recruited experience, is the pressure
Yeah.
that may or may not exist. Whereas, you know, again, I think there's a really interesting dynamic too, that we've heard this from others. When I didn't know any better, I just saw that somebody wrote 556 on a chalkboard, and I guess that's the standard, versus I've been doing this for 6-8 years, and like that's an abstract number. So I think that that's also playing into some of my questions. But going back, yeah, like, where at least did you start to feel like, all right, like this could happen maybe, or
Yeah.
like this is like, yeah, like I might not get kicked out of the camp tomorrow. Maybe I'll start there.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
when did
that's a good.
the Dread Pirate Roberts stop? Right, where it's like, good job today. Probably cut you tomorrow.
Yeah, got you. I was Steve. I didn't know where you were going with that for a minute. I was like,
Yeah, neither did I.
Yeah.
But thanks for clarifying.
RUTSs. What are we talking about now?
Birds of unusual size. They don't exist.
Uh, so yeah, okay. So I'll back up. I'll say
Yeah.
that it's not that I never thought of high performance. Like it just wasn't put in those terms, I guess, because Mike never talked about it. It wasn't a subject back then. You know, it was just like you were there to win. No,
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at Mike not using the word high performance. And
Yeah,
that
I mean,
just
could you imagine him like saying that? No,
No, no.
but
it
but
was
he
like
did say
bow
he-
ahead good, bow behind bad.
yeah, pretty much.
Bo said that. I was just like, I'm trying to also imagine what it was like being with Mike day in and day out in 98 and 99, because Luke and I were in the U23 system at that point,
Yeah.
and you had kind of jumped over that, and just, yeah, you're right. It was not part of the vernacular.
No, it really wasn't. So okay, so then the moment would be, so I go to Elkhart, I get invited. Me and this guy Joel Scroggin from Brown start clicking in these boats and these Cox fours, and we're moving this Cox four, and it's like winning a lot of pieces. And so like it sort of grew from there. And then there was one day where I got switched a lot. They tested me, and there was one day where they switched me against this other kid from an Ivy, and I beat him, and he basically had a meltdown in the boat, like a tantrum, where he was like hitting the boat and out loud screaming that he couldn't believe he lost to a kid from Ohio State. And that was a moment where I was like, I can do this shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's gotta be very empowering. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so from there, like that first Elkhart camp, like that happened. I kind of got my name in the system. I made the U23 8. I was 7 seat. And it was going well. And then I went water skiing with my host family and broke my rib. Did not know that I broke my rib because, we're in a high performance culture, but we don't talk about it. And it's like, so, and they couldn't do anything about it anyway. Like, there's no doctors there.
You take Advil. You take Advil.
Yeah, it's like,
yep.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then I tried to row on it, and it just got worse and worse. And I went to Oak Ridge, Tennessee for nationals, which is what all the under 23 camps did back then. And we raced the senior team at nationals. And
the junior team.
That's right. You guys were all there. And I was in a Cox 4. I was stroking this Cox 4, and we did a start at the start line, and my rib went. Like, it was bad. I could not move after that. I couldn't breathe. And I literally had to paddle it in. And that was the end of that summer for me. I had to take a bus from Oak Ridge, Tennessee to Cincinnati, Ohio, which is not a Greyhound I think anyone should go on. That was a tough leg. And so
you didn't sleep the whole way.
I didn't sleep the whole way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got in super late anyway. So
with a broken rib too.
With a broken rib.
Brutal.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that all happened, and then basically I get invited back the next year.
Okay.
And that next summer is where it really kind of took off, and I was kind of a more established member of the camp, and I didn't get switched as much, and ended up making the 8 again, 7 seat, and Tom Welsh was stroke seat, Princeton kid. And so that year,
this is still U23 still, right?
This is still U23. Is my second U23 year.
Nations Cup for a throwback.
That's right, Nations Cup. Same thing with Steve. You mentioned the Accra scene. It used to be the Champion Regatta. So then anyway, so I make that 8 again, and then we go to nationals again. This time in Indianapolis, and I get to race, my ribs fine, we get to race. And Mike had put down this like challenge is like, if any of the U23 eights get close enough to the senior eights, I'll invite that eight back to camp, to senior camp, and try some of you guys out. And so we finished within a length of the senior eight that he had put out. And so we got invited back and we went back and trained with the senior group. And that's where I really kind of got my opportunity. And Mike switched me against a couple guys and I won those seat races, and T Welsh did the same. And the two of us went into the senior eight that year. Yeah, that was 98. Cool. And that was the first year we won. Well, that was the second year they had won, but that's the first year of like that boat that had been intact for those 2 years.
The American Heroes boat, baby.
Yeah, that was the poster. By the way, I'm blurry in that poster, so I don't know how any of you guys recognize me. I'm out of focus.
It doesn't matter, man. I think that
it's a small community. You know the names. You know who the people are. There's only 9 of you.
But I love like, thinking about it from a coaching perspective. And man, I love that you brought up that Oak Ridge Regatta, because I think that Oak Ridge Regatta was one of my highlights of rowing, because you did have all aspects of the national team there. And I was starting my junior. I made the junior team, and that's a whole different story. But I just remember being in the presence of the U23 and the senior team, and we raced each other too, right? Because there was the senior B, and it was just such a great way to like really see what elite rowing was. And to hear you survive that injury, to hear you come back, to hear you dig yourselves out of because you had to go back to Ohio State, and just that dark place of being on that bus, right? Like that's not an easy place. I like how you gloss over it, but it starts to show the resiliency that is Bryan Volpenhein, and I think building that. And so you make that 8, you become the American Hero 8, you come back to St. Catharines, and again, it's just kind of cool that they just had Worlds in St. Catharines again, Mega Worlds.
Yeah.
And I remember that race too, is you had this epic comeback where you just drop a move and you kind of charge back through. And now the U.S. men's team is going into Sydney with 3 world championships under the belt. And like take us into like what that training camp was like, because I think if you want to see it from the outside, there's the documentary. What is it? Fine Balance or Perfect Balance?
Fine Balance, yeah.
A Fine Balance. Perfect Balance is, I think, a Keel's book.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it's a Fine Balance. And I think that was an interesting piece to watch, but to be on the periphery, because Luke was at the 99 team and I was in that camp. And I mean, I would love to know that from what you described in the past, is like that was not an easy year. No. It was a very brutal year in the training and the erging, and there was no boathouse. Princeton's boathouse was under construction, so you guys were in that VFW. So can you take us a little bit through what like that lead up from 99 and winning Worlds was to getting just to Sydney, making that team, making that boat?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit like what Justin was talking about, where in the beginning, there's like no pressure, right? And you're just happy to be there. And it's like, there's this freedom to it. And you can just kind of, attack every day. And then, they had won 97 and we won 98 and then we won 99, and was like, all of a sudden there's pressure. And, I'm not sure we all handled it very well. But it was a long year, I think, because of that. And when you add in that we had to go to the qualification regatta for the 4, that kind of threw a wrench into things. That's always complicates things. And so that, I just don't think we managed it very well. But I think what it was, you had years of like pedal to the metal training and practices and competition and really going after each other for 3 years in a row. And then for it to drag on that year, that Olympic year, and not be clear like how things were going to go, I think that is where it really wore on people. And everyone in the camp, I think it wore on. Um, but and that's, but you know, you learn a lot of lessons through all that. I don't have any hard feelings about it because it was like still my first Olympics and new, and I was still the youngest guy. You know, like I tell that story to a lot of the athletes I coach now is that like I had to paint the oars every year because I was the youngest guy every year. You know, it's like I had to earn my keep. I had to keep earning it because I was always the youngest in that group, in that sort of 8 guys competing for that 8 group. And it just was a long year where nothing got settled ever. And I think when things don't get settled and things aren't clear and it's not that there wasn't transparency. It was like everybody kind of knew what the results were, but you knew that it was confusing is what you knew. And so there wasn't any certainty of like, this is fast, this is what we're doing, and this is our goal, and this is how we're going to get there. It was all like, I think this is the best lineup, or this combo kind of works, or, you know, when this guy was in there for that one piece, like it was still pretty good. Like maybe we should try that. Like it wasn't any like clear line. And I think that's where it gets really, really tricky for people who are trying to, you know, perform at that top 1% on a very specific day.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like that, I think, made it very hard.
I mean, because I remember looking at that from the outside and just seeing the just behemoths of rowing going for that boat. You had, Cyrus Beasley, who was just wrecking ergs at that point, and
Yeah.
you had Coven, who came out of the single winning gold in the single in 97. You had Eric Mueller, who had a silver in the quad for 96, like chasing down those Germans. Um, guys, guys like Bea and Ted Murphy, and that the 550 mark on the erg was starting to get broken very often. So you guys were, one, the erg had a huge evolution from the Model B that had the cage to the Model C, so it was a more efficient machine.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys were pushing the limits of those scores. I think at one time I remember reading an article that Mike basically said, "Yeah, we have more guys under 550 than any other governing body."
Yeah.
So there's this raw power that's really deep with it. And to hear your perspective of that, the lack of certainty and how it dragged out, and the regatta itself too, because I would love to know what it was like for you to go through that regatta. It was your first Olympics, and I think a stat that's really interesting that I think young athletes in the audience need to know is in rowing particularly, and even across the Olympics and other sports, most Olympians do have an unsuccessful Olympics when it comes to the medal.
Yeah.
I don't want to take away from becoming an Olympian is an amazing feat, right?
Yeah.
Becoming a national team athlete is an amazing feat. Truthfully, surviving college rowing is an amazing feat in itself, and there's levels to it all. And most Olympic medalists, I think the average is 27 is when you
Mm-hmm.
get your first medal. So technically you personally are on track, but you also had those juggernauts of Jeff Klepacki, it was his third games, and Bob Kaler, it was his third games. And you had Garrett Miller at a 542, and you had Dave Simon at a 540. And so on paper, it looked really good. And I'm pushing here a little bit, but can you take us a little bit through Sydney? Because I think it's important for people to see it, even at that level, how many things have to go right for it to be successful. And, we'll get there. But it's important because I want to know the lessons you learned from why it didn't go right and how fine of a razor's edge that is. And when it starts to unravel, can you stop it? Or is it inevitable that it keeps going? Because I do feel like we have a shared experience of like, it could have unraveled, but it didn't. So I love the fact that you have these 3 perspectives, but this is the first one.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that when I think about it is there's very few people at that time felt comfortable talking to Mike about any of this stuff, the coach. And so there was no one that could like voice the athlete's opinion and get concerns out there and say, hey, what do you think about this? Why don't we try this? There was no like two-way communication really. And so I think that and then on top of that, you have the weight of, you know, all that talent and all that power and all those guys that have been doing it for so long. This was like very clearly their last chance. And for it to kind of just to start to crumble at the end, I think weighed really heavily on a lot of hearts and a lot of minds and just a lot of people that kind of sensed that it was like coming to an end before we even got there. You know what I mean?
Oof.
And
Yeah.
so that kind of put this vibe in the whole camp that was like of doubt, you know, and I think, you know, you need to have that element of trust where there's like give and take and back and forth between the coach and the athletes have to feel like they can be heard. Um, you know, and there has to be some sort of clarity to it all, or at least a pathway to get there, you know? And so I would say that's one of the biggest things I learned just watching the whole thing. Cause I was like, you know, I was not in a position to talk to anybody about it, or I didn't even know any of that really at the time. I just was like literally trying to survive every day, you know, because I would be rowing bow one day, 7th seat the next day. Like I'd just be in, you know, five. You know, he's doing all kinds of things to sort of make a lineup click. And you're just trying to like keep up with it all. And so, and you're trying to encourage each other and keep people happy, but that's the weight of it was too much. Right. And so I think not having that trust and having a little bit of doubt in there, I think made it very difficult to succeed. And then when you get to the Olympics was tricky because I think that was the last time we actually stayed. Any U.S. team has stayed in the village um, during the regatta, like during the racing, and we went to the opening ceremonies, which was, I think, probably a mistake. But you know, who knows? So, but it's like, you know, all the little logistical things that add up that account for that, you know, top 1%, like just weren't going our way, or like the decisions weren't made that were kind of like weren't focused on that high performance of like, what do we need to do to get to the end goal? Um, and I would say that was probably one thing that really got adjusted in the lead up to 04. So that'd be the big takeaway, is just the ability to voice concern, the ability to be heard, and the ability to like kind of like get to like the path that you need to be on. You know, Mike always used to say, it was like it's like one of his quotes that he always used to say. He's like, I'm going to the fucking Olympics. You either get behind me or you get out of the way. And I think that worked early, but as soon as it like there were some complications, like that became very difficult.
Can you talk about just I want to go back for 2 seconds. Like
Just because I'm doing some math in my head and it's okay. You did you see you did the Ohio State thing, and then
Mhm.
did you like pause Ohio State to just commit fully to the national team? Did you move to Princeton? Like, kind of like what
Yeah.
was that? Because you kind of you talked about it like you were all in, you were fully committed, like, but yet you know you were like, hey, like I didn't know what it was like. I'm happy to be here, right? So, but yet you like you moved your life, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think if I'm putting the pieces together, I'm just picking up the tea leaves. So is that's accurate, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's
Okay,
why I
cool.
graduated in 02 and not
Right.
98.
Because I'm like, all right, this is like a 94 flyer.
Super duper duper senior year.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is
exactly.
like a 1994 you know, come learn to row flyer, and now we're graduating 02. But
A
all
lot of
good.
people
No,
go to college for 10 years.
it's all
Yeah.
good. It's all good, dude. It's not where you start.
Yeah.
So super cool. As far as like, you know, putting that all together. I guess the other question we've had this kind of come up on some of the shows too is like, even though, you know, it was your first games, like when you got, and there was obviously seemed to be a lot of like noise around this particular
Mhm.
boat, especially coming after all the world success. Um, when you got named to the 8, you're gonna be an Olympian. Like, what was that realization? Like, you didn't really talk about it. You kind of were just like went straight into like opening ceremonies, but
Oh yeah.
like just going back, you're like, okay, this started with a flyer, you know, putting my beer down, walking across the street to a meeting. And now you're sitting you know, being named to, you know, do you have your passport? You're going to fly to Australia. Like, you know, how, like, can you kind of put that into context a little bit? I think that's a really interesting kind of piece to the story of like, you know, you're going, you've now ascended to, okay, now I'm going to be an Olympian. Can you just talk about that for a second? And then I have a follow-up question as far as the actual games.
Yeah, no, that was another interesting thing about that year and that selection of that year is that it was very anticlimactic, like getting
Okay,
named because it was a very rainy day that day, and he had cut so many people, and it was so disappointing for so many people
sure.
that you didn't feel like it was okay to celebrate.
Okay.
And so, you got named. You had your moment of like, holy shit, I'm going. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And then we went back to our house and had a little celebration there. Um, and then it was really it was really back to the grind of like, okay, how are we going to make this work? And then you're doing a lot of the media stuff that starts to pick up, and then it starts to feel like the Olympics.
Okay.
But it was such a short window. It was like August, it was picked. And I think we left in September.
Okay.
Um, so that's kind of, yeah, go ahead. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that does. It does. And I think that that's a really interesting piece, right? The subdued
Yeah.
celebration, right? Or, and you know, I understand that, right? Like you're living, eating, breathing with these same guys, you know, for a long time, and then, you know, there's a certain group that's going, there's a certain group that's staying home.
Yeah.
So I understand that, honestly, out of a respect for your kind of colleagues. That said, take us to the games, right? So there's all this expectation. You guys are like, you know, on a win streak. You've obviously, you have the target on your back. I think you have some maybe new members in the boat, right? After all this
Mhm.
selection process. Um, Take us to the actual games now, like to the actual regatta now, right? And I think that's what
Yeah.
Dan was starting to allude to. Of, you know, I'll fast forward to the finals, right? So you know, I went back really quick. I just took a quick look. Like you actually had to go through rep to get
Mhm.
to the final. You get to the final, which I'm sure was like rare, right, for this group.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
to not just go straight from a semi to a final. So, like, were you guys like, what was the headspace, right? Like, and again, like, I know I'm poking around here,
No, that's
but
good.
yeah,
I
like,
could probably be more direct.
yeah, you can.
The
That's the whole
headspace,
point.
the
Yeah.
headspace wasn't good.
Okay.
Um, so there's a whole story between the heat and the final. Like basically, we knew the boat wasn't fast before we left.
Okay.
Like you could tell. Like you just knew that it wasn't as fast as it was with Worley in there. And that's no fault of Dave. It's Dave Simon, the guy that
Yep.
replaced Mike. Worley is, he's 19. He's coming off of back surgery. That's a lot to ask of a 19-year-old kid. And so you kind of had this sense because we were basically the same speed at a 32 as we were at a 38. That was like our wheelhouse. Like 32 was like we could go really fast, but we couldn't go much faster. So get to the Olympics, we had this long training camp in Yamba on this really narrow river through all these sugarcane fields. So there was no real sense of like, are we getting faster? Is this better? What's the
Straight line
speed?
speed. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
because this is before GPS.
Okay.
And so that kind of like didn't help. And then yeah, but you're there, you've gone through processing, you got your gear, like you're feeling like an Olympian then. And then and then you kind of move over to the regatta, and the pressure is real. Like, that whole thing of like your first one is just overwhelming, and then the second one you do better. That is very real. Whether you know it or not, it just feels like you're in a fog. You're just in a fog. Like you don't know, like there's so much going on and there's so much hype and pressure, and you're on TV and all this stuff. So there's a fog to it. And so I think that's what the heat felt like. I think for a lot of us was like, this is like it's just happening and we don't know how to control what's happening. So like shit, we're not going to qualify. We're not going to win this heat. And then it's like there's no urgency to like make a change or make it different. There's like a hopelessness to it. So then you have to go to the rep. And then so we go to the rep, and it's like a couple days later, and we get through to the final.
Yep.
So that's good. So that's like a little bit of bump. We're like, okay, maybe this is good. Then Mike takes us over to the Nepean River, which is just a little bit of ways from the race course. And he gets Corzo to come out, who was coaching the Dutch team at the time. And they try to fix us. We do these long rows on the Nepean, and we're just going back and forth on this river. And Corzo's coaching the shit out of us, trying to change our technique, trying to do all these things to help. And then we ended up switching stroke seats. So we put Jeff Kopacki in the stroke seat. Aaron's went to 6, and thinking that would help a little bit. And it was the same. It was like, that wasn't going to help. And so you kind of had this sense already going into it that like, it's going to take a miracle or someone else screwing up and making a mistake in order for us to win. And so that was a really hard place to be. And again, at the Olympics, there was no real discussions about this. There were no like back and forth team meetings of how we're going to solve this together. It was like that you couldn't question it. And so that I think it made it very difficult. It made it very difficult for the older guys in the boat. And I think they voiced their frustrations sometimes. And I don't know if it got heard, and if it did, like what can you really do at that point, right? So yeah, and then we get to the final, and it was just like, again, a fog. It's just like a numbness to it that you're like, shit is happening to me and I have no control over it.
Right.
I'm in this race and I can't hear anything. I can't feel anything. It's happening and I can't stop it. And that's a like very kind of scary place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
I can imagine.
It's terrifying. It's
Yeah.
And I think that's crazy. What's crazy about that too is like, if you're a rower, you have that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I think my only reference of sport is kind of wrestling with that. Just had me rowing since I was 10, 11 years old. So just being in so many rowing races, and I try to explain that like, the better you get at rowing, the emotion doesn't change. It just gets faster. And so I think every oarsman and oarswoman has been in that fog. Like when, no matter what you're doing, I think we call it spinning the wheels. I think we call it, you know, there's so many ways to describe that feeling. I think the fog is it, where it's like, no matter, and it's not, I think the hardest part too is, I remember watching that race, and it's not for lack of effort.
No.
I think that's being the person in the arena. That's really important, which is why I really love these interviews. And it's winning matters. I think we say that often, like winning does matter. And when you go to the Olympics with the potential to win, and it starts to unravel, I think for any sport, that frustration to squeeze the soap really hard because you don't want to let it go is what ultimately leads you down the path of not making it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually because you try and just do it with more effort. And to hear you explain it, of like, you needed to be able to discuss it, right, is really a powerful thing, because you come in 5th in that race, correct?
Yep.
And
You have somewhat distant 5th.
yeah, and so the air is let out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
You need to, I want to know a little bit about that licking of the wounds moment type of thing, or like, because you're still at the Olympics, you still have the second week, you still have to find a way to enjoy this.
Yeah.
And I think I'd love to see how you kind of dealt with that. We've heard Luke's story about it. We've heard Juice's story about it. We've heard Akil's story about it. Is that you can't make sour grapes out of the whole thing, but because winning matters, you have to kind of lean on a resiliency that you've been building all these years. Because I think a champion is how you get up, not how you compete.
Yeah.
And so can you take us a little bit into that champion moment you had that starts to set the stage for what is your revenge tour?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It wasn't for a lack of effort. And so I think you can always rest on your effort. Like if you leave it on the water, win, lose, or draw, like if you put your best effort out there, then you can always find ways to be happy with that and be at least sort of content with that. I think the key is to make it the right effort. I think that's where like the discussion comes and the back and forth and like, being able to go to hash it all out with your teammates and give each other sort of room to talk about things like that. So that it's when you need to make a change, you can make a change and it's like the right kind of effort. And I think, so like after the race, like, you don't say a word, you're just paddling in, it's just a very quiet paddle back to the dock. And then it's very somber. It was a very somber moment, like of just like hugs, saying you're sorry, like, like that kind of stuff on the dock. And then you just go and, Mike was there, but like, what's he going to say? Really? There's nothing really to say. You just have to sort of be in your misery and like let it really sink in. I think that's the important part, because when you let it sink in and like really feel how shitty it feels, not just to lose, but to lose knowing you could have won, and to lose in the way we lost, like choking basically, it hurts a little bit more. And you got to let it sink in, because that, like when you learn how to lose that way, like you don't ever want to go back there, and you're going to do whatever it takes to not go back there. And so, but I think a lot of times people, they try to like come up with reasons or excuses or overanalyze it. And sometimes it's just that you choked and you didn't do a good job and you didn't win and you lost, and that's okay. And like, and it's okay to feel bad about that. Like it's supposed to be and feel shitty to lose. Like that's not supposed to be fun, or you're not supposed to find solace in that. You know what I mean? It's supposed to be like, I'm going to sit with this for a while and I'm going to let it sink in and burn in my brain and in my heart that this is not going to happen again. And so there's a lot of embracing, a lot of talking, a lot of like gratitude towards each other. And then once you get through all that, then you start to see your family members and you start to see your friends and your brothers and your sisters, and you see all these people that are there. And as soon as you see their face, you're like, oh, it's not just about me.
Right.
Like I had my moment to feel bad for myself. Now there's bigger things in this world that mean more than this. And I can keep doing this. And that's something I need to be grateful for. I remember right after that, I flew to LA after Sydney. This is like a week and a half later. And I stayed at my Ohio State Coxon, my friend from Ohio State, our Coxon. I stayed at his house and I was living on his couch for about 5 days or so. And, I'm down in the dumps. I'm feeling pretty shitty. I'm kind of moping around, drinking too much, just like wasting time basically. And his buddy was over one day and I'm just sitting on the couch and he's like chatting me up, asking about the Olympics. He's like telling me all this stuff. And then like, he's asked me like, why he's so bummed. He's asked me, he just point blank asked me what's wrong. And I was like, well, we were supposed to win and we got fifth and I feel pretty shitty about it. I was like, yeah, but you got to go to the fucking Olympics. I have to go to work tomorrow. I was like, that is the moment that you're like, hello, this is it. That's when you realize, okay, you kind of remember the beginning of like, why you started, what made it fun, like what's so important about it. And that's a sort of an eye opener for you.
Man, that's
reactions like that.
That's
So-
beautiful, man.
So take us through like that happens in 2000. You do the couch surf, and then like after that, right? Like, was there the like, all right, let's get back to work, or were you like, I need a minute? Like that was that was a long haul, not a desired result. Like, so what? Can you talk to us about that transition a little bit? Because I think that's an important piece of this too, of the mental reset, if it happened or not, like, and just a little bit of where'd you go from there?
Yeah, definitely.
The
Definitely a
decision
reset.
the decision, like, I'm gonna give this another go, like all that.
I think I knew I was going to go again. Like I was
Okay.
like, this is as bad as it is to lose. It's a lot of fun still. And
Yeah.
I also didn't know what the hell else I was going to do. I knew I wasn't going to get a job, or really didn't. I was like, didn't really want to go back to school, but so I basically took time off until January. I didn't
Okay.
do anything until January. I just kind of like went home to Ohio, stayed at my mom's house, you know, saw my grandparents, uh, saw my family, friends, all that
Sure.
stuff. Did spend some time at Ohio State visiting people. I just decompressed.
Yep.
And then our first rowing camp was in Austin, Texas in January. And I went to that. And that was like the beginning of the '04 campaign. Um, yeah. And then I was also still trying to finish school. So what I would do in that year in '01 and '02 is I basically would go to school in the fall in Ohio State, the fall and winter quarters. And then spring, I would just go to move back to Princeton, and I would be there for the spring and summer.
So, I mean, and this is, I think one, man, thanks for really getting deep and vulnerable in like I think there's a really good balance of like what I think it means to be a great athlete is to be both vulnerable and stoic at the same time. To kind of be, it's like you need to be very emotional to want to push yourself that far, and you have to be very committed. And truthfully, your teammates have to see how bad you care.
Mhm.
I think the people in this group and some of the people that may listen know that I'm the extreme of vulnerability sometimes.
No.
So, Steve really got me good the other day. I got to share this with you folks. You'll laugh as we were talking about something. He's like, "Yeah, you're Billy Bob." Walsh cries because he's a bit of a crier. Like, so,
Yeah, pretty much.
um, but I think you balance that really well, and I do. I love how the fact that you said that it wasn't really up until this beginning of this campaign where you started to realize the high performance mindset. And I think, well, one is where actually everybody on this call got to become your teammate. Because I will say the interesting thing about Princeton Training Center, whether you do it for 10 years plus, like you and I and our crazy asses, or you've done it for 1 year, and Luke made the term like a year in San Quentin's a year in San Quentin.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that 2001 summer though, and I think this perspective of this is the true dawn of PTC, because leading into 2000 there was a competitive camp in Georgia with Igor was still on the scene,
Mhm.
and there were still kind of the guys that had Spracklin as a coach in '96 on the sweep side, but 2001 was pretty much everybody had Mike and the Princeton Training Center had become the place to be. And not only was it this place to be for the heavyweight men, but the open weight women had now moved there from San Diego. The lightweight men were training there. We had the entire U.S. national team now training in this one location. And in 2001, we had a pretty deep group of young college guys that came into that system at that point.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of really young blood. And what I remember really clearly from that was, whether it was by design or whether it was by circumstance, but James Tompkins, right? So the Oarsman foursome, awesome oarsman. I think at that point he had won a gold at every world championships and every sweep event. He was coming off of getting bronze to Seb Bea and at Sydney. He had won the four twice. He was really coaching you and JR, and that four that had, I think, was like Mueller, Garrett, Torgi, and I forget who the fourth was, because Wolf wasn't back yet. But it was a really young group, and you were kind of the only real veteran that had come back at that point.
Yeah.
And
I think it was
so
Mueller.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know Mueller was back, but that four was kind of separate. You and JR were kind of in the eights mix, and the rest of us were all trying to desperately make that eight.
Yeah.
And whether you knew it or not, you were our leader. right? Because as the irony is, like, you went from being the young guy in the bow to now you're the old guy, right? Now you're the experienced guy. You know, you're the one who went to the Olympics. You're the one who was in that 8. And I think we really looked up to you. And I would love to know the influence of like what it was like to have Tompkins as a main influence driver because of all the just knowledge on winning, right? Because that's what was missing. We didn't win the men's 8. And I use the word we because I think it's American rowing, like feeling invested in that for you and feeling that loss as a fan. Like that loss hurt the rowing, like our constituency. And we wanted to have it successful. And I remember coming into that camp in 01 and knowing, like, I don't know who's going to be in that 8 in 4 years, but it's going to win. And I think Jimmy was a really good catalyst to that feeling because you knew that dude knew how to win.
Yeah.
Is that accurate, or do you see it differently?
No, I'd say, yeah, he was a big influence on mostly how I rode the pair, but also he is someone who also I learned a lot about balance from him, like life balance, perspective, what's really important. From someone that has done it at such a high level, and to be so down to earth and you just easy to talk to, I learned a lot from him. So before he got there though, like the fall, like JR and I, JR comes out to Ohio. I'm finishing school in January in Ohio State, and JR comes out. We bought this Hudson pair and we had it in Ohio, and we were training together in the pair. And that's when the system changed from 8s and 4s, just banging heads seat racing, to like now there's this selection regatta that we got to go to. And so we get this pair and we're out there rowing in Ohio State. And it's literally, this is the first time where I was like, okay, we're going to figure out how to move this boat, and we're going to figure out all the little details that go into it. And it was literally like we would take one stroke and we'd be like, all right, what did you do there? What did you do with your outside hand on that stroke? Okay, how did you feel this? And then we would take another one and we'd be like, okay, let's try this on this way. And we would do that. And we would literally do like 10K max on the water, and then we'd come in an erg. And so that I think was very formative in the sense of like, how are we going to approach moving this boat and not letting what happened in 2000 happen again going forward. We're going to be skilled enough to handle that. And so that was the beginning of it. And then Tompkins randomly came on a road trip with his wife across country, across America. And he stopped in Princeton to kind of meet with Mike and see the team and meet a few of us. And he ended up staying at JR's house where I was staying that summer. And so that's how we really got to know each other, is that we were living together at JR's house. And we just sat up at night and just talked rowing the whole time. And so that I think was, it was you got into the minutia of like grip and feeling rowing and all that stuff. And you also got into the big picture of, training programs and culture and all that kind of stuff too. So that made a big difference and a big influence on me and JR especially.
Yeah, because I think that like setting that stage for this next chapter, right? And obviously this chapter is exciting.
The first chapter is pretty
vibe.
damn exciting. I'll be honest.
Yeah, I know. It's the whole thing's exciting, and
I have one kind of stage setting question that I kind of want to revisit when it comes to our shared cycle, because obviously the next cycle is where I more come in to the story of Volp.
Ooh, now look who has the ego.
Yeah, Steve.
What's it like? Like, what is that feeling when like you show up for that first practice and it's just like you're the constant and there's like a whole new group? Like, what is the turnover like?
I love that shit, Steve. That makes me giddy. That is like my happy place, is when it's like a whole new group of people, and it's like you got to figure each other out, and you're going to go out there and row some boats, and like that to me is really fun.
Like
The 01 was a lot of fun. A
like
lot.
I'm envisioning a little
It-
bit like the end of The Sandlot. Like if you remember the movie where like the guy, like some guys fade out and then other
Yeah,
guys
yeah.
like stay for longer. Like I'm envisioning that as it kind of transitions and there's like new energy and I think it's yeah.
Steve, I think that's a good question because I do think it was it was very exciting, you know. I mean, it was just all new faces, and I had known a lot of you guys before that, but like to see it be like such a young group, and it honestly felt like uh I honestly felt like I was closer to you guys in a sense of like age and like maturity level than I was to the group before me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we were
Oh, yeah.
we were definitely less mature than
Yeah.
before the previous cycle.
Yeah.
Which
Like the
which is probably why it was successful, right? Like because a lot of us were just happy to be there, and I think
yeah.
not it just to level set stage set, and I love how you said this. You had those guys. What an environment shift for you is, and I think I felt at the end what Jeff and Bob and those guys felt in 12. So it's just weird, but I think to your point is being happy to be there is really important because I
Yeah.
think that to break that down to get to like what we try and talk about on the show is what it means to be not only just the top percent, but the top 0.01% is that the desire to be part of the process day in and day out and figure out how to smile doing the hard stuff.
Mhm.
As 01 to me, and it might be because it was my first senior team camp, but also because it was so fun and the guys were having like we pushed each other so hard. Like that in some ways was the most brutal selection that I could think of the 15 selection summers that I've been part of.
Hmm.
Like that summer, and maybe you were kind of in and out of it because you were the pair and you weren't, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the standard that was set that summer was really cool. It
Yeah.
was really cool.
It was a good way to step off that whole quadrennium. And I think
Yeah.
like, I mean, you guys might have different opinions on how I was as a teammate and in that role, but for me, it felt like being one of the few returners. I think there were 3 of us that came back that year. Um, I felt a different kind of responsibility and to be my best and to be good and to get better at it. Like, I knew that I had to grow a little bit and in terms of my athletic abilities and my understanding of rowing and what makes boats go fast. Whereas before I was like, I felt the responsibility to like be my best to not let the other guys down. Like now I feel a responsibility to like make sure that it's done right and that so that the people that I'm with now, like that doesn't happen to them. And so I don't know if I did a good job of that at all, but like that's kind of like the feeling of it. And the way that sort of manifests in my behavior is to like basically be a little bit more of a goof and joke around and like try to make it more fun. That's kind of how I approach that.
No, you
I mean,
absolutely did
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, you
Yeah.
did
I
that.
mean, I remember showing up and it was sort of like, oh, it's the national team. And
Yeah.
we're all new and we're young. We've done under 23 stuff. But there is just this moment. I do recall it. And I can't tell you what the day was, but I just remember thinking to myself, like, it was almost like a relief. I'm like, okay, Bryan wants us to be here. This is good. This is good. He wants us here. This is good news. Like it was almost like check. Like there was like this moment of relief. Like this guy's done it. He's been through it. he seems pretty happy we're here. This is a good sign. So like,
Yeah.
I just like early days that summer when we all got together, I do remember that feeling and being like, okay, good.
Oh, I can do this.
Yeah, I can do
Well,
this.
you all,
Yeah.
it also makes a lot of sense of like now hearing the story and how you processed 2000 of why you were that leader and why you were fun is because I think you had the courage to once sit with those feelings. You had the perspective of that comment of like, dude, you went to the Olympics, I have to go to work. And you realize that, you know, you already are special. You're just going to try. But the whole idea of being an Olympian is not high performance, it's high improvement. So you're like, well, if I can improve, I will improve.
Mhm.
You brought that into your action from almost day one with the way you describe you and JR approaching it, which is like, no, we got to be better and we got to be better at everything. But I think the example that you set, and maybe this was the influence of Jimmy, but the example that you set was courage. And I think in some of the stuff that I'm learning with like what I'm doing with this imagery coaching stuff on the sports psychology is you personify something that is now just being studied with MRIs, which is don't be confident, be courageous. And you were the only person to come back from that 8. You were courageous enough to do it right away. Now, maybe that was because you were youthful, maybe because it's you, but that set the tone of why would this guy come back if he didn't think he could win? And I think that's what really started. And I love the jokes because you're like, I don't know how you guys thought of it because yeah, the joke is like you never pulled hard unless it, unless it was a final,
Yeah.
and but I think
Sandbagging
that
son of a.
yeah, you sandbagging son of a bitch. But I think that to me, where being a on the opposite side of the coin of Mike, right? Because you were obviously the favorite, and I probably was not.
Yeah.
in that time, in that time frame.
Yeah.
The way you set the stage for 01 was really good because I think what's important for the audience to know about this campaign without getting too far ahead of ourselves is we did not come out guns blazing like they did in 97 with the young, again, a young group of guys. Like you had said, Vea was still in college, and I think Phil Henry. And if we go through that lineup, we'll see it was very similar at that moment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young guys. You and Luke were in that 8 that we went to Lucerne, and I was in the Cox 4. We did not send a pair. Where the 8 did as well as the quad, I believe.
Yep.
And we did not have any medals at that World Championships. And so, but that didn't feel like a letdown.
No,
like it was frustrating. It was frustrating.
Yeah, but it felt okay.
Right. It felt, and well, and until I won't go into the hype up speech that Mike gave me after Lucerne.
Oh no.
Because it's not my story. Cheers.
I guess I should say it felt like progress.
It felt like it was gonna it felt like the right first step. Like the fact that there was so much upward mobility because it was so young.
Yeah.
And that's when I think you really took the reins because that fall, you and I got to row the pair at that speed order. And then I just remember like you talking about the pair and how the pair was going to be the path to success. And you got to be able to row a pair well. And the guys that are going to make it have to row the pair. And I think that narrative that you created that started to matriculate backed up by the results at these NSRs where you were competitive in the pair, and that was bringing up all of our levels at the same time. So I think that's why, like, to answer your question as both someone who started off as a fan, right? You were a hero. You're like literally looking at that. You became a fast friend in that 01 era. You did help Justin and I throw the best head of the Charles party ever, in Boston. But you did create the tone that would wind up being the next 3 years leading up to Athens. So I would love to hear, I think, a little bit of this story of how did you feel these 4 years progress? Because we know what happened in Athens, and I can't wait to get to that point. But I want to know, like, one, what was your edge in those 4 years that you think you had above all of us? What did you think you did better than all of us? And the joke that I use is, I had to have the best bench press and beat everyone at Halo. You know, like you have to have that one thing, you know, or for me, it was just like I knew pretty much no one was going to beat me in the 250. Like you just
Yeah.
maybe it's not the 2K, but what was Bryan Volpenhein's edge? How did you keep it sharp? How did you protect it? And were you ever afraid of losing it?
I don't think I was ever afraid of losing it. I think my ability and Mike letting me go back to school at Ohio State and finish and train there while I was doing that gave me space to um, really develop my skills in the pair and like my approach to that and like the feeling of like how it should feel to move a boat fast. And you know, we're constantly talking to Tompkins on the phone. Um, with check-ins and almost every day, like just chatting with him about, hey, we tried this in the pair. How do you do this? You know? And he would just give us little tidbits here and there. Um, but I think my advantage was I had Mike on my side and I was the only returner. And so he and I bonded that way. And like there was a connection there that started to grow between Mike and I, that he started to trust me um, after that first NSR. He was very nervous leading up to that, but then when we performed at that first NSR, he started to trust me, and I think that became my advantage. Um, Being able to like talk to Mike a little bit differently, like have some more sort of like adult one-on-one conversations with him, and then being able to like take that back to the group and instill some confidence, I think, and like, hey guys, we're gonna be okay. Like I felt like I could be a little bit of a connection between Mike and the team and a little bit of a buffer, so to speak. Um, but I think just having that space to like figure it out on my own, like that's so invaluable to have that like time to like just take it one stroke at a time, like literally one stroke at a time and like figure it out. And then it just allows you to develop these skills that when it's time to step on the gas, you're able to do so in a way that's effective. Um, I'd say that was my biggest advantage then. Um, and then as you go through that first year or two in the pair, like that's when the confidence started to come in, where I started to feel really comfortable in a pair. Like I could move it at any point I wanted to move. I could change speed on a dime. And I just felt like that was now a weapon for me. Like I felt like I couldn't get beat in the pair at home. I didn't know about internationally, but I just knew that if I did what I had practiced, like I I could win. And so like I think that confidence came from that having that space. And those two things combined it really became a weapon for me. Because as you guys are have probably experienced, like sitting up on me in the pair towards the end of a piece, like when you know that I haven't really tried that, you're getting more and more pissed. And then I sprint, and then you get mad at me.
Luke,
can't-
I mean,
I
obviously,
can't-
we
appreciate
always
your
talked to that.
honesty.
Yo,
Yeah.
I
first of all,
appreciate your honesty.
first of all,
I
first
don't
of
know
all,
if you're joking or if you're actually being honest
no,
right
he's
now. But
he's here's a duck. Here's a duck. He's fucking serious because nobody else except me went to his award ceremony for being where he literally had the best speech ever. It was like, I always thought I was a little bit better than you guys, and now I have the award to prove it. And I will say, being a damn bridesmaid to your wedding so many times at an NSR and being second to you is yes, it was frustrating that that edge was yours. And you know, I hope Wyatt listens to this and I hope Wyatt wants to come on to talk shit. But yeah,
He
dude,
will.
it was amazing. It was amazing to see your confidence and your ease in that pair. I think your ability to play the game,
Yeah.
right? I think what people forget about rowing is that it is still a sport and it is a game and it's a chess game and
It is.
navigating regatta, especially selection. And I can remember whether it was you just knew how to turn it on in a day, because I will say this, there were plenty of practices where you tried really hard to sprint through Wyatt and I, and you couldn't. So,
Yes. Yes.
but it was never on the day. You had this ability. And I think hearing about you having that space to build that confidence is such I'm not jealous of your ability. I'm jealous of that opportunity.
Yeah.
And I word that use, it's not the green-eyed monster of envy, right?
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Yeah. And I think that's just really important to hear of, like, that's a 1% marginal gain that I think is neglected, is that to put it in a word, you were given athlete autonomy. And maybe that word is trust, and maybe that word is confidence in the athlete. But you seem to have the choice to be able to know it was your destiny. And I think that is something that some of us didn't know how to get in that system. Maybe it wasn't given to us. But the way that you elevated the pair in our country, and I think I'm going to fast forward a little bit and take some liberty here with the show, is you challenging Matthew Pinsett and James Cracknell Henley has to be one of the most epic, and I use again the word courage, examples of courage and rowing that I've ever seen. And to me, I think that was a huge turnaround in 03 because, I was in the straight four that year, and we started to have we had not a horrible Henley, but we had taken some pieces away from the British four in training, and you guys were competitive with them. But I think we're going to get to Athens, but I would love you to take us, and Justin, I'm going to just hop on your line. Can you just take us through that Henley race real quick?
And by the way, who
Because
was your pair partner for that? Was it still JR?
JR.
JR,
Okay.
yeah. I'd say I rode with most every port. I think I rode with most every port. They didn't always go well, but usually, like, Watling and I had like a shelf life of how good it could be. But basically, so Steve, to go back real quick, is I didn't mean I wasn't trying. I meant like I was honing the skill of like the game. There's a little cat and mouse. And I guess my point was that must have been frustrating to like try to compete against. I definitely
but when you were in the boat, it was great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
wait, here, one line. Here's one line with that from the outside that I don't think you even know, Bryan, is when you went to, it's fast forwarding a little bit, but it was when you were in culinary school, and Deacon was getting frustrated with your training regime. And so he came to Princeton, and Bo had to fly out with you.
Yeah.
And you and I were living at Joey Hansen's house.
Yeah.
And you went to Joey, and he was like, "Oh, poor Deacon. Now he's not going to win the NSR."
I know.
Because Deacon was a bridesmaid too, right? Like, again, Deacon's won. He's won so much shit, right? He's won so much shit internationally, but didn't win an NSR against you.
Yeah.
So yes, but shit talking is part of it, right? You brought
the fun part.
You brought gamesmanship to it. So I know I'm on a rant. I'll stop.
Yeah.
You played the game better than anybody else.
Yeah.
So going back to Henley, the question.
Going back to Henley, I think so. I got it. I had a couple opportunities.
Sorry, real quick. Sorry.
No,
sorry,
go ahead.
Just for the audience, the Pinsett Cracknell pair, legendary in sport of rowing. For those that don't know, it's arguably the two best guys that have ever rowed the pair for Great Britain, like ever. Very awarded, very, I think they're both knights now, so or whatever, they are practically kings. So yeah, very, very highly decorated pair. So we'll just let you pick it up from there. Sorry.
Yeah. I think it started like 02. Mike let JR and I go to that first World Cup in Seville to race the pair. And that's when I started to see real international speed of like, oh shit. Like, that's where I got a reality check. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, fuck, these people are real fast. Because every World Cup I ever went to, I got fifth in the pair. And so it's good that I did that. And so the opportunity to go do that was big. So we did that in 02. And then in 03, we did a Milan World Cup, but then we got to go to Henley. And again, I got fifth at the Milan World Cup with JR in the pair. And then fast forward to Henley, we do a training camp over there. And that was also like another level of sort of high performance attitude that we got from over there, just seeing the British train and seeing how they
Yeah.
do it, and
Yep.
seeing all the team and the staff that's around them, and talking to their athletes and seeing how they live was like, oh, this is a whole nother level. And so trying to bring some of those elements with it, I think that was a good experience for us there. So we did this training camp at Eton Dorney, which is where the 2012 Olympics were. And so we're training there, and Jared and I aren't taking it very seriously like we always do. We're goofing off, we're dicking around, we're like, you know, making jokes and whatever, making fun of people and talking shit. And we go out for practice, and we're going to do these pieces against the British team. And everybody's matched up with their boat class. And so we get to go out and we get to do a piece against Pinsent and Cracknell. And we line up to do this 1500. This is before Henley. And like 2 weeks before, maybe. And the coach says go, and they are gone in about 5 strokes. Can't see them, can't hear them, gone in 5 strokes. And like to where I have to turn around and be like, Jared, we just got our ass whipped. So,
Where'd they go?
yeah, and so they
who go?
finish, and then literally like 40 seconds later, we finish, and they're like turning around. They finish their water already. They're turning around to paddle back up. And we were like hitting buoys on both sides of the lane. It was just like, and they're just rowing back. And as we're rowing by them, they're just talking shit. Like, watch out for them boys, and like this, all this, like, it's like, oh, fuck, that's embarrassing. We just got our butts whipped. And then, so then we kind of woke up a little bit, took it a bit more serious, and then got a little closer for the rest of the practice, but not that close. Like they clearly were faster than us. And fast forward to Henley like 2 weeks later. So that kind of like ramped up the seriousness of that training camp and how serious we were going to be on the water. This wasn't just like a fun trip anymore. And so fast forward to Henley, it's like you have the early rounds, we win those early rounds, and then we get into the semis. And this was a big confidence boost for us, is the Skellen brothers, the two Croatian brothers who were rowing the pair and were very good. I think they were medalists in Sydney, right? Yeah. And so we were facing up against them in the semifinal, and we stuck with them in the first half. Like we were right there, kind of sitting up on them a little bit. And then we started to move in the second half of the race, and they just stopped rowing. They just quit. And they call it in Henley, they call that road to a standstill. That's what the results will say. And that was like, oh, that was a lot of fun, right? So that's like, okay, we can do this now. Let's see how we can do this. And the big thing we learned in like doing the practice with Matt and James was how aggressive they were and how high they rode. So we were kind of a little bit more like passive rhythm, whereas like 35, 34 in the base, just kind of rowing and feeling, and then we would sprint. And so we made a big adjustment in the final for the Henley, where we're matched up against those guys, where we decided to just go at a 38, which we hadn't really done before in the pair. And we jumped up on them a little bit, and then they worked back through us, and then we just sat on them. And then they kind of inched out a little bit towards the end, and then it was like, this is where all that like practice comes from, of like gaming it and like playing those games and sort of developing those skills of like pacing and then sprinting and then pacing and then sprinting. And so we were in a position to do it, and we made this last push in this big final move, and we just jacked up the rate and really started going for it and almost caught him. We were within like a deck. But I think that was a big deal, because I think not many people had gotten close to them before. and it was a shock to the crowd. The crowd was really cheering for us a little bit, and the commentators were very excited about it. And so, in the newspapers the next day, they wrote about it. And, Matt and James tried to make this excuse that they hit some bottle in the river, and that's why, nonsense. So that was like, okay, we can row the pair, and we're here, and like we can compete with the best in the world. And so I think that ramped up the level of sort of intention on what we were doing, especially for me and JR.
Man, that I remember that race. It's I, I remember that trip, and I do remember that it was a lightning bolt. Um, the eight had a real rough race too.
They had a tough one, yeah.
They had a real tough race, and so I think going back into selection that summer, I'd kind of solidified myself into the 4. So I remember being kind of removed from the 8 camp at that point, and you and JR, I think, had that opportunity to try and push to see if you wanted to row the pair at Worlds or go into the 8. And I think lucky for the US, you guys went into the 8. I think, playing hindsight, it would have been interesting to see what happened at Worlds because James and Matt lose.
Yeah.
Not only did they lose, they get 4th.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
lo and behold, who wins? But Jimmy and Drew, right? So your coach, your mentor, the person who taught you how to row a pair, Obi-Wan, is who you might be. He Qui-Gon goes, oh, if Volp can almost beat him at Henley, I guess we're going to beat him at Worlds.
Yeah, exactly. They're vulnerable.
And I think that, and I think what's interesting, that resets the whole British team, right? That resets the whole British team. We're now Pinson and James. I think to show the like ripple effect of rowing and the gamesmanship at that level. But before we digress into you, and we've heard this story from Bo's side and Beery's side of you guys beating, him in the summer at Lucerne. If I remember correctly, and I think this is really important, especially for young athletes, because it's going really well for you at this point. The U.S. team has gone 4th in 01 in the 8, third in 02 in the 8, which you were in. A second place in 03 in the 8. And I think you and JR made a huge addition to that, obviously, from getting their butts kicked at Henley to almost chasing down the Canadians, who at this point really are not only our rivals because of a North American, but because they had now won. Didn't they? I think they won in
02.
Did they win in 02 and 03?
In 03, yeah.
We go into this training camp, and that training camp was hard for you.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, right? Like, I think the easy wins that you were getting is we all started to catch up.
Yeah.
And the pair selection and the 4 selection started getting really hard. And so I think the key thing that I would like young rowers to hear, and anybody that wants to be the greatest at anything, because you are our GOAT, is there was a chance. There was never a chance I didn't think you weren't going to make it, but there was definitely, like, you were not the top of the heap that whole winter.
No.
And I would love to know how it worked, how you handled that, because it's coming to a point where we all know the Olympic year. I experienced it. Steve experienced it. Even as the best going into it, if you start to become the worst, like, guys that were athlete of the year, all of a sudden getting chewed up. So did you, one, ever feel like that it was starting to unravel, or you peaked too soon? Or two, we did get back to Princeton, and you did row with a Bo, and you did win that first NSR, so it did work out. But like, how did you get through that rough training camp where you went from being the clear best to all of a sudden having to earn it again?
Yeah, I think even if you go back to 03, like when I think about that summer and the 8 lineup that we ended up with and the result we got, I was kind of pissed. I remember being pissed after 03. And I think I was mostly pissed because of the way the summer had gone and the results that the 8 were getting. And then Mike kind of let us do this pair thing every once in a while. Like the 8 didn't get the results he wanted. And so I think he started to get a little bit more grumpy and like old Mike, right? And kind of like a little bit of a dick again. And so that put me in a bad mood that summer. And I was just like grumpy the whole time. But then you're right. Fast forward to '04, like you start the year again new, and it's like you go to this, you're in the fall in Princeton, you have this great training center, and we're doing it. We're doing the fall races, and it's a lot of fun. But get to that, you know, winter training camp in January in Chula. And I'm not a, I don't like training very much. It's like, I like practice. I wouldn't say I like training. And so I'm a little lazy. And so the 3-a-days wears on me physically and mentally, mostly mentally, I think, where I start to let my inner thoughts come out, and I'm not on my best behavior in environments like that. And so I think that the training, the 3-a-days, kind of wore me down a little bit, and I don't think I handled it super well at the time. But yeah, there were definitely days where I was like gonna quit and just go row the pair. A lot of days, you know, and I was, to be honest, I was afraid of that. That was more scary than sticking out the camp and seeing what's going to happen, because that's like really going out on your own. And I didn't know if I'd have the support to do that. And so like I was afraid. I was really afraid of going for the pair. Um, and in the back of my head, I was like, no, we started this mission, you know, a long time ago, and we're gonna finish it, and we're gonna get through this and see what happens. Um, but yeah, there are plenty of days where like quitting was on my mind, and just being grumpy about it all, and just kind of like whatever, and like why are we doing this? Why are we doing this training? Why are we like questioning everything and having that little seed of doubt creep in? Um, and that's where like guys like Chris Aarons and Chip and the guys that had been through it with me, I leaned on them quite a bit, just to talk through all that stuff. Uh, and I think that's like, I just actually just did an interview this morning, with one of Sarah's athletes for one of her classes. And that's like, one of the things we talked about was like, if you're trying to be the best at something and it's not hard and you're not thinking about quitting, then it's not worthwhile and you're not doing it right.
Yeah, going hard enough.
Yeah, it's like you gotta challenge yourself and find those environments that's like put you outside yourself. Um, Even if you don't like it, and I kind of always knew that in the back of my head, like I am not the kind of athlete that can like row the single and train by himself and succeed.
Yep.
I need a group of people around me. I need a coach that's like on me, and I need people holding me accountable because I'm not going to do it myself. And so that's what got me through those 3 months there.
So did you feel like by that point, because you talked about it at the end of the cycle in 2000, like there was no feedback loop, right? There was none.
Yeah,
It was a one-way conversation, like you kind of mentioned, you know, the idea of like, you know, get I am the locomotive on the train and we are going, and if you want to get into one of the cars, hop in. If not, just don't block the track.
yeah.
Was that feedback loop more open, or were you basically a anointed voice within that feedback loop by that point? Like that, did that help you, or was it really just your cohort of you know, again, the Chips, the Chris Aarons, like the, you know, that were like, hey, like we know this shit's annoying, but like it's a means to an end.
Yeah. I think it was more at that point, it was still more the teammates than it
Okay.
was Mike. I mean, Mike and we could have talks about rowing and
Okay.
like, you know, and like discuss things like that and like how boats feel and
Sure.
you
Sure.
know, how different things are going. But it wasn't quite yet where I could sit down and have a heart to heart and be like, Mike, I don't think what we're doing is right.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, dude, nobody was safe in that camp from Mike.
No, yeah, it was just
Nobody
like
was safe.
it was still a little bit like it was a little cutthroat.
Yep,
But
fair enough.
I will say the difference was when you step back from it now, you do realize there was a system to it. There was a method to that madness. I mean,
Mhm.
he was running a parametrics. It was working, and he was filtering the people to the top. And you don't always see that in the day to day when you're in it, because you got so many other things you're worried about. And I think that's another good lesson for young rowers out there that are like struggling, is like, you got to take a 3,000-foot view of it sometimes and really try to see what is actually happening, not just like what's right in front of you. Because then that helps you understand what's right in front of you a little bit better. It's like, and I didn't really do that until we left. I think when we left Princeton, it was like a big, I mean, left Chula Vista to go back to Princeton. It was like, oh, okay, this all kind of worked and it's going to be okay. And that,
Yeah,
and that's when the more the meetings with Mike started, where we were talking about sort of more, um, sort of like philosophical stuff about the
Yeah.
boat and
So,
boat chemistry and that stuff.
so, you know, just to kind of draft off of what Dan was saying. So you're kind of, you're getting closer and closer to, like, as you mentioned just now, like finishing the mission, right? Like, is there more pressure now? Like, are you feeling the more pressure to, like, okay, we have to, to your point, like, you have a default in the pair that you don't want to go to, but it's there. Obviously, like, I'm really interested to hear Luke's perspective on this, being that he rode the pair. Um, but that said, like, is there more pressure, or like this round, right? Is there more um, you know, confidence versus not? Like, I'm just really interested in the dynamics of, like, first time around, second time around, pressure versus, experience, like how that all filters. Um, and to your point, like, nobody was safe from, you know, the camp, so to speak, but at the end of the day, like, there was obviously a sense of confidence, like, I'm here to get in the aid and make the bait go faster. So, like, uh, there's a lot of jumbling going on. I'll be honest. Like, I'm just curious as to, like, where the clarity in your mind was, is like, this is what we're doing, this is how it's going to go. I know I'm going to make the boat, or I have a good sense I'll make the boat, like things like that. um Juxtaposition with your training, for literally your mental approach to training
I mean,
versus cat and mouse games and baiting and like
yeah,
all this
yeah.
shit.
I mean, honestly, I think I never felt like I wasn't gonna make it.
Yep.
Like
Fair.
I always felt like, even though it was hard, like I always felt like I was gonna make the boat.
Yep.
Um, and I felt like I was in a good position the entire camp in terms of like selection. I just I wasn't handling the training load mentally very well. Um, wait, what was the other part of your question?
Yeah, the part of my question was just like understanding, like, how the so yes, there's the training load, right? And you mentioned the
Yeah,
mental,
yeah.
like, the mental
Oh, the
grind, but
pressure,
the
the pressure.
pressure that
Yeah, yeah.
also is associated with, again, like, you went in 2000, you had a boat that, was capable of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
probably, being at least on the podium. And now you're like, all right, 4 years later, almost, like, same kind of position. I'm going toe to toe with Pinson and Cracknell. I'm in the eight with JR, my pair partner, who's been through this with me. Like, the boat's really fast. Like, it's getting better and better every year. Like, you have a target to go chase down in the Canadians. Like, how does that pressure manifest? Or is it just like there's a looseness? That's what I'm getting at. Is there a looseness,
Yeah,
or is
yeah.
there a pressure to, like, if we execute? We've heard this from other people, that there was some folks, it's more on the women's side, actually, that they were like, hey, we knew if we executed on that day, like, it was ours.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, like, how that pressure was manifesting for you. And again, like, I think it's really interesting, like, with Dan on the call, right? Like, he's in and out of that system, like, in the boat rather. So, like, just want to understand, like, the dynamics there.
So I would say there wasn't a lot of pressure in '04,
Okay.
if any. I think because we hadn't won anything yet, you know what I mean? So we were still the underdogs in a lot of ways.
Okay.
I think internally we knew that we were fast. Like we knew what we were capable of doing. And I think it was a matter of going out and doing that on race day, which I felt very confident that we could do. And I think most of the guys in the boat did too. Um, it's it, like, whereas in 2000, it was like you had this big lead up, and so you feel all that, the weight of that pressure. I would say in 04, it was more like you don't feel pressure, you just feel nerves, because
Yep.
you know how fast you could go and how fast you can be, and it's just like the nerves come from like the question of like, can I do it today on race day?
Sure.
That
So, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
oh, I think that's what's really important is like three things I want to drive home. One, you were in the process, and the process had to be so hard that even though you knew you would make the boat, that still wasn't enough to make you feel like you could handle the work, right? So you, as one of the best oarsmen, was being pushed to your breaking point, and I think that's really key because I was forcing you to grow. The process working and filtering to the top, I think that's important because just from perspective, I started in, I was the para whisperer for Wyatt type of thing coming into that. So I was in Chula for 2 months earlier, doing that training load for 2 months before the rest of you guys came. And I remember that I felt relieved when the 12 of us got to go back to Princeton early. And I think I felt that sense of relief that you did too, which is like, okay, here is the makings of what's going to be, the Olympic champion 8. And I'm in that mix. And I think knowing that you felt that relief too, which is like, yeah, we got through Chula and this is the 12 that we're going to start with. And, Aaron, basically everybody that wound up making the 8 was in that mix. And I think pretty much everyone that made the 4 was in that mix other than, Garrett, who came in at the end. And so I think it's exciting to hear you talk about that you got pushed to that point where you considered quitting. And I think that's a voice that you have to hear and you have to conquer. Your edge is about to come up, right? We get back from Princeton, and that edge that you articulated so well, that was yours, the gamemanship, especially in the pair, and how you elevated the pair for the U.S. is we're coming into those NSRs. And I think as the spectator of this, and again, one of the people that you're internally competing with is you just went on this tear, right? You had this Phoenix moment of Chula where you're like, I'm thinking about quitting. And as your teammates in the conversations, it was rough. And Luke, here's where you come back into this narrative too, as like a great observer. Is now you're just going to that. We go to that first NSR, and you're just, because I think it was with Watling at that first one, or was it Bo? Or no, it was Bo, right?
It was Bo, yeah.
It was Bo because JR had the tendonitis. You and Bo just light it on fire, right? You light on fire, you win. We get to the next NSR. Now you're with JR, different partner. He was injured. You win. We get to the summer. Mike starts to think, well, what if we do a 4 and an 8? And both are going fast. And now it kind of looks like we might go for 2 medals. And you guys go to Lucerne and you have a rough regatta until the end where you win and you beat the current world champion Canadians and Pinsett and Cracknell and I think Williams and I forget the fourth guy, and you win Lucerne, and the 8 gets a really narrow 4th. And now it's like we're going to put the best 4 guys in the world empirically into an 8 that got 4th by a little bit. And to me, as heartbreaking as it was not to make that 8 or that 4, I got to have the best seat in the house of being part of that training camp of the 8 and watching you guys galvanize, because you started off with breaking a record at Princeton in that 1500. I think that was the turning point where like the 8 wasn't going to be touched. So can you take us a little bit from winning at Lucerne, winning every NSR, knowing that you're the best, being put in the stroke seat of the U.S. men's 8, so from bow to stroke 4 years later. And what was it like leading from Princeton, going, I believe you guys went 357 or 356. The only reason why I know is because we beat it in 08, right? So it was a
Yeah,
tough time to beat.
It was like 56, 57. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was the fastest time, and we had the Dutch from 96 is like, so it's a great lake to know fast. I kind of would like to know that run from I'm now stroking the US men's 8. I've beaten everybody in the world that I want to beat. All I need to do is keep this train going. So I would love to know what it was like from that 557 or that 357 1500 to getting to Athens.
Yeah. So if you go back like a couple weeks before that, maybe a little bit more, I had never stroked an 8 before. And so I remember when we got back from Chula, JR was stroking. And I don't know how it came about. I think Mike may have asked me one day if I would do it, and I just said sure. Because I stroked the pairs, and I'd stroked a couple 4s, but I never stroked an 8. He's because mostly I don't think he's starboard stroked them. So then I remember the first time. So you think about what it's like being a novice again. Like I remember that. So that 8 is quick already with JR stroking, and Mike re-rigs it, puts me in there. And I remember the first practice we went out and we did these like bursts. Chip had to like pull his mic aside, and he's just like, calm down, dude, calm down. Just row. You're gonna be okay. Because I was like, it's like it's totally different when you go going from 7 to stroke. It's just like chaos. I had no idea. And so like that was like a little bit of a novice moment for me where I'm like, I got to relearn how to do this shit. And it came quickly, and it was fine. But like, so that's where it started. And then, it just was one of those lineups where it felt easy. Like from the first stroke, it was always one of those lineups that felt easy from the first stroke. Like I felt like I could just row how I wanted to row. And maybe it was because we had done all that work in the straight 4s as like, the 3 straight 4s that were always competing, and we were mixing it up, and I had kind of rowed with everybody. And so it, it felt like they knew what I was trying to do in the stroke seat. And I felt like as soon as I could feel them behind me, like pick up my rhythm, that's when I started to get a lot of good confidence of like, oh, I can do this. And having Chip in front of me was like a big deal. I had like 2 very calm people around me. I had Chip in front of me and I had Bo behind me. And so like, Chip is a man of like he uses a lot of words, but like when he's coxing, he doesn't. And Bo doesn't ever talk. And so like
That
We
know.
got him to talk for 2 hours, but go ahead.
yeah, I don't know how you guys did it, but
It's hard.
Bow ahead. Bow
yeah,
ahead.
exactly.
ahead.
I mean, he would just always like it would be one word from Bo, and then it'd be like coxing stuff from Chip. But it was like I could always lean on Chip to be like he knew when it was good. Like he could feel when it was good, and that was like a feedback loop of like gave me confidence. Because I could feel that it was fast, but I didn't know if it was like what if it was good enough. And Chip always had this sense that it was really good and it was going to be good enough. So yeah, we kind of had that 8 kind of already, and then he broke it up, and we went to Lucerne and raced. And then when we get back, it was like I remember there was a conversation with Mike. This is where like when we got back from Chula is when Mike really started to like have more meetings. Like we had meetings all the time in that boat, which Mike never did. But there was a lot of discussion of how the rowing was going, what it felt like, what we wanted to accomplish, how we wanted rhythm to be, a lot of that. And I remember there being a conversation with where was I going with Mike one point about I should have just lost my train of thought.
You're talking
But
about coming back from Chula, and you started to have some more meetings. The lineup was kind of starting to solidify itself. That's where
And
I was.
they ate
That's
back
what
together
I
at
picked up.
Lucerne after Lucerne.
oh yeah. So when we got back from Lucerne, there was like a little bit of question in the group of if we were going to row the 4 or not. And I remember having a sit down with Mike where he was like, do you want to row the 4? And I was like, "Fuck no, we're going to run the 8 and we're going to win." And so I think that being able to have that conversation with a mic, and like that was the path, that then you knew that like, okay, this is what we're doing, this is what we're going for. And then from there it really just escalated. It like ramped up quick, like the speed started coming. The rowing was really high quality. The group, like it got more loose and way more fun after that, when it was like decided what was going to happen and there was like confidence in that decision. I think that made a big difference. And so once,
before
go ahead.
we get to Athens or any closer to the Olympics, you said something about finally getting your chance to stroke and Mike never rowing or rigging starboard stroke boats. Just a thought popped in my head now as a coach as well. Do you think the advent of the wing rigger allowed more starboards to stroke because suddenly coaches were like, oh yeah, we just flipped the riggers around, and like suddenly it went from like, oh, where are the mirrors, are they in this closet, and suddenly
Yeah.
starboards got opportunity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it could be.
And
Yeah.
just
I'm just a,
envisioning Mike suddenly having a Hudson in front of him and like, oh yeah, we just move the
oh, this
riggers
is
around.
easy. Oh, this is so easy. Yeah, I'm just like I'm a child of technology, Steve.
Opportunities came with
Yeah,
technological
exactly. I
advances.
took advantage of them. I think that's also like, that was one of the good things about, like, once that was decided, basically, that we're going for the 8, like things got looser. But I think the other thing too is that, like, and I don't know if you guys felt this, but I definitely did, is that like in that group, especially in the whole lead up to it, to that whole quadrennium, like everyone that kind of came through the system at that point, it felt like there was always this like space for everyone to be themselves. There was no kind of like comply or leave. It was like everyone kind of was like, had their own little idiosyncrasies and things they did that were weird, and like everyone always gave each other the space to kind of be who they are. And I think when people talk about chemistry on a team, I think a lot of people think about like, well, everybody's got to have the same mindset and everybody's got to think the same way. They got to be on the same page. That's how you get chemistry. And I think it's kind of the opposite. I think it's like, what makes teams great is the differences between people, and allowing those differences to shine, and like allowing the individuality of each athlete to sort of really be there, and like feel like that athlete feels like they can be themselves and be their best selves. And I think that's where the team chemistry grew. And I think our 8 really had that. Like we really, like, even when we talk shit to each other, like within the whole group, there wasn't like, it wasn't pointed and it wasn't like mean spirited. It was always like in a loving way. And it's like, I feel like that makes that really develops team chemistry and culture in a good way. And I think
I,
that's one of the most powerful things about that 8.
I think you nailed it. I think that's where rowing needs to evolve, is realize that as homogenous as it looks from the outside, is that the best teams are you can see the individual shine within it.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that, I don't know if this is the right analogy or colloquialism to use, but I think Levski and I were the canaries in the coal mine of that experiment, because as the alternates, we were chosen to be alternates for that 8 and that 8
Mhm.
only, not the entire team. And that was very much the role of it. And I distinctly remembering of being angry, not getting to race, but knowing that I was there to back up you guys. That's all that mattered. Like, you guys were my friends, and I wasn't going to let my friends down. Levski wasn't going to let his friends down. And we really felt genuinely that you guys both wanted us and needed us to be there. And we were allowed to feel the pain of that of like there were, I think that was the interesting thing is, yes, those were the 9 athletes that made that boat, but most people felt like, oh man, if I could have been in it on that day that it went 3:57, that could have been me.
Mhm.
And I think that individuality that you speak to was there. And I think that's what made that 8 so well, is that you knew that if somebody else had to come into it, it wasn't going to sacrifice the mission.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think that's really important.
and I think that also helped me accept my role of like, yeah, you're the spare. Go be the best fucking spare in the world.
Mhm.
Right? Because this 8's going to be the best in the world. So every single part of it has to be the best in the world. And I think that's a really beautiful way of saying that, Bryan, is yeah, you have to allow people to be themselves, because in rowing, the goal is to look on the outside like it's one unit, but the beauty of it is that each organism inside of it is beautifully important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like
I think
it's like a little mini city.
yeah. Well, I call it chosen symbiosis, just like a human
Yeah.
organism. Like the liver,
Yeah.
the brain, the kidneys, everything has a function, but look on the outside, it looks seamless. So,
Mhm.
all right, we're almost there, and I think that I love if our audience is still with us. I know they are. We're still here. The boat's named, the team's going. You get your second gear package. You're going to the Olympics. Tell us what's different about this time going into it than last time that you've explained, and how we get to this slightly important heat, not only for you, not only for America, but for the Olympic movement in rowing.
Yeah. I mean, where do I start? I think like it's first of all, it's like it's a completely different um attitude. Like there's zero weight, and like you don't feel any like heaviness or anything. All you do is feel excited because it's like you feel like it's the right team. You feel like it's the right people. You feel like it's the right time, and you feel like you're going back to Athens where it all started. And so it's like this, and the whole thing that happened in 2000 is kind of um it feels really far away because it was so many new people. And so there's just a lightness to it. There's definitely an underdog mentality where like we still have something to prove because we really haven't won any races. Um, and so, and we were still an unknown. And so it's like you're you're going over there with like a whole different attitude right from the get-go. And we were selected probably 3 months before, if not a little bit less maybe. But it was like a long time where we had together to like prepare and get ready and like get our heads around going, you know what I mean? Like so that it that helped quite a bit. I think that was a big change. Um, and then, you know, there was just so many novelties about that summer where like we did our training camp in Bulgaria, and this is post 9/11. That's a big difference between Sydney and Athens is it's a pre and post 9/11 Olympics. Um, and so you went from like no security at the Olympics, you just go wherever you want, pretty much anytime you wanted, to like in our training camp in Bulgaria, there was an armed guard on every single floor of our hotel. And we took an armed escort to and from every practice where they sped ahead and stopped traffic at every light. And we sped through like to and from. It was just, it felt surreal, and it felt like just so different that it was like everything from the past felt like that's where it belonged and that's where it was. Um, and so you could really just enjoy the moment, you know. So we're doing these and at that point we had put up we had so many good days that like Mike kind of relaxed a little bit, like to the point where we get in Bulgaria and he told us to rig the boat and go for a row. And we rigged the boat and we did 4K on the course and then put the boat away. And he was like, "What are you doing? I told you to go." He's like, "We just did. The boat's rigged. It's on the rack. We rowed." And so like, normally that would have made him like blow a gasket, and it was fine. He just sent us back to the hotel. And like other little things that just made it feel like there was this humor to it and this fun to it. Like, remember at the hotel, there were like little plates that were like this big in Bulgaria. We
Yeah.
ate all of our food on plates about that big.
And every meal started off
Yeah.
final countdown, the mixtape over and over again. Yeah.
And then it was like the training camp was on a course where you could get times. And so that felt like confidence building, and it was a fast course. We weren't staying in the village. We were staying way out by the course, and we were isolated in our own little houses that we had. And it was bare bones and very Spartan, but it was like just what we needed. And so there was this lightness to it.
It was also
uh,
Club Med, looking out onto the Aegean, eating fresh food next to a
oh,
pool every
that
day.
part of it. Yeah, yeah. The houses
Oh,
themselves
okay.
weren't finished.
Correct.
But you're right. Yeah, yeah. Once you get out of the house,
They
you're
ran
like,
and they ran out of
oh,
water. They would run out of water
yeah,
every day.
yeah.
We would run
it was
out of
rough.
water.
The paint
Yeah.
was literally drying on the walls when we showed
Yes.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had that dog. It was this little dog. This like dog.
Blinky.
Blinky would follow us everywhere. His eye was infected. It was closed shut, and he went with us to and from our house every day to breakfast and back.
Blink.
Little team mascot. So there was just like a different kind of attitude to the whole thing,
Yeah,
and
certainly.
and the van rides to the course were fun, and that was like a different vibe too, because it was so short, and there was music. And I remember this is when we got our first cell phones, and you could text.
Yeah.
There's like
Bing
T9
bongs.
texting. Yeah, so that was like
Yeah.
a thing everybody was doing. So it was just a different
And the
whole different
women
era.
and the women's eight was fast too. And I think that
Yeah,
helped.
definitely
Right.
helped.
We knew
Yeah,
they were fast. And so there was like this sense of speed and pride.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we're all together in that little villa area. So that was a lot of fun, I think. And so like that just took a lot of the pressure off. And there was no outside expectation. When you have all this outside expectation of all these people hyping it up and building it, and you feel like everyone's looking at you, and you feel that pressure, no matter who you are or what you say, like you're going to feel that pressure. So I think it just was a really good camp, and it was a really good sort of lead up to that heat, where it was just like, we're feeling good. I mean, I will say one of the this speaks to like how much Mike had evolved and changed. There were days when we were paddling around that course at the Olympics practicing, where we were getting passed by singles. Like the German women's single would do steady state faster than we would. And that must have been super frustrating for a coach to just sit and watch. But every time we came in, it was really high quality rowing. So you would like, there were days when I just got goosebumps. The rowing was so good, because I just knew that if we just did this, we were going to win. And so that was basically like every practice was like that, where it was just like, okay, we're making another step. It's getting better. Every day it gets better. And that's one day closer to racing, and we're going to have a legit shot at doing this. So when the heat day rolled around and it was freaking whitecaps, like ripping tailwind, was like a little bit nerve wracking. Not gonna lie, I was a little bit, oh god, because then you start thinking like, crabs don't catch diggers. Like, am I rigged high enough? Like, are they gonna let us race? Because remember, they closed practice times the day before because the wind was so bad they didn't want people sinking, so they wouldn't let you practice.
And I think a great perspective to pause here of how brutal this water could get is the Junior World Championships is the test for every Olympic course the year before. And the Junior 8 swamped.
Yeah.
And they swam the boat across the finish line. A couple.
Not just a couple, not just
Right.
one.
But the winner, right, swam the boat across the line, to the point where we were putting technology into our boats that had bilge pumps in them. And there's literally a go baby go switch in that 8 that I remember.
Yeah,
and the reason why I remembered it is because when we did alternate workouts with Levski and I in it, and I think that was a really smart move by Mike as a coach, is like we practiced, and I think that is another from the outside of the confidence of like, when you put your alternates in a boat and it's still going world record fast, you're like, okay, yes, if anything even goes wrong with somebody, we still have the resources to do it. So I think from building a team, but knowing that it was my job to hit that go baby go switch, it's like, oh great, here's one more added thing: is don't fuck up the world's fastest boat and hit the switch if it's like white capping.
At the same
So I
time.
think that, yeah, that those conditions were borderline, let's cancel it. So I think that's really important for the audience to know, is like, this is borderline too rough to row.
Yeah. And yeah, it was. Quick side stories about that switch. They tested it one day in Bulgaria. Do you remember that? And they filled the boat with like 8 or so 5-gallon Home Depot buckets, like that size bucket. They just kept dumping them in the boat. And then we went out and rowed and turned it on to see if it would work. And it didn't really work. So we're rowing down the course, and like Mike just starts screaming at us, like, because the splits were so slow. He's like, what the F is going on? It's so slow. Why is it so slow? He's like yelling at us. And then finally Chip was, or I think it might have been Aaron's, or maybe it was Chip, just basically yelled out, there's a shit ton of water in the boat. And he goes, oh. And he's like, take it to the dock and dump it out. And we just like, we could barely get it out of the water. There was so much. So anyway, the bilge pump didn't really work.
Yeah.
But we left the switch in. So it's still there today.
Go baby go switch.
Yeah, the go baby, yeah. So yeah, so we launch and we do our warm up, and it's just like mostly by sixes, because it's like white capping. We don't want to get any water in the boat, and we're just trying to get to the line basically. And I would say that I was very, very nervous. More nervous than I have ever been for a race for that heat. I think it finally hit me that it's like, shit, we could win this, and we have a really good chance, and this is a really fast boat, and if I screw this up, like, that's a big deal. I can't do that. So I got really nervous. But you kind of have to get over it and just sort of swallow that nerves and get on the water. And so the warm up went fairly well. It was like fine, normal warm up. I can't remember. The only thing I remember from the heat is Italy jumping out on us very quickly, but it didn't really fluster us.
And you also have the world champion Canadians in that heat too.
Yeah, and Canada was right there, and they jumped up on us too. And it was rough rowing. But once we caught Italy in the middle there, like they started to fade and we caught them, then I was like, it felt more like home. It felt like I was been training for this for a long time, just being down and like ready to sprint and knowing that they can't stop me. Like if we can execute this sprint, they can't do anything about it. And so that was a really fun place to be. I mean, on the water, it's chaos because it's like there's water splashing. At one point, I think Deacon hit a big wave and it like hit the oar into his legs, and almost looked like he was going to get ejected there for a second. If you look at the video, you can almost kind of see it. So that was a little rough, but then it kind of smoothed out at the back end, and that's when it really started to like click. And you could be like, when I started to sprint and I could feel that everyone else in the boat was like right there, that's when I was like, okay, we can do this. We're gonna win. We're gonna get through them. I can tell. And I look out of the boat all the time, and so I was looking constantly, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but I do it anyway.
Well, I think getting to the finish line will let us know if it's good or bad, because I think it was pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was like, I mean, we got through them right at the end, the last few strokes. And then I think that was a bit of a hit for them. I think that was hard for them. And what's interesting about this situation is that like it's the exact same situation we were in 2000. We had won the previous 3 world championships. They had won the previous 2. We were highly like the favored crew. They were the favored crew, and then we both lost the heat, and kind of went downhill from there for us. And so it was very interesting sort of comparison between those two crews.
Well, I think the interesting part is that the Canadians set a world record in that heat,
Yeah.
and so did you.
Yeah, yeah.
And that Olympic record still stands to this day.
It does. Mostly because it's like there weren't gale force winds at any other.
Yeah, but I think to just think about
No.
that, man, like you came back first. You adapted. You became an oarsman. You took on the mantle of stroke. You drove the process. You set an Olympic record. And you made this training fun, right? You were an example of what it was like to bring fun and gamemanship to the sport. You really you literally changed it. You broke the space-time continuum with your friends. You inspired a whole generation of oarsmen and oarswomen. And I think in some ways, like that heat was just a precursor to what was going to be the final, because I know we'll put the race in there and everybody watches that race and you just can't help it. And, you win it. You win the Olympics.
Yeah.
And I think, Justin, it's up to you. I know we like to go through every race. I don't, but you win the Olympics, man. You have the revenge boat. And
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
it's an interesting place to be your fast friend in this, right? And I think
Yeah.
Steve and Luke and Justin, and I think the gravity of it's kind of hitting me right now in a very humbling and beautiful way. One, getting to watch that so intimately from the stands and experience it, but you really are this amazing legend of rowing. You're this amazing legend of American rowing. I think that the fact that I think I love there's a Lakota saying, I believe, that if you can't make fun of it, it's not real. And I think the fact that you are this really walking icon that is so much fun to make fun of is what, and you do it to yourself is what makes it so real, right? I think what makes you so not just inspiring, but aspiring. And it's just a real privilege to hear that. And I just, again, like the gravity, think that in terms of our sport, it's going to be 1500 at the next Olympics. And who knows, like, does it go back to 2K? And,
Yeah, who knows?
Somebody can't break that Olympic record next time,
Yeah, that's true.
So it's standing for another 4 years. And
yeah.
Steve and I also know what it's like to go that fast, because I just, thanks, man. I'm just a little bit taken back right now of hearing you talk about it.
Well, I appreciate you saying all those things, man. It's very nice of you.
Yeah. And so I would love to hear about the final. I would, from your perspective. I mean, I've heard it, and I think, Justin, I don't want to take your thunder, because that's usually your.
No, you're not taking my thunder. I think, yeah. So Bryan, like one of the things that we find pretty interesting on the show, we've had, a lot of our guests put us in first person in the boat. We've heard from Dan Beery, right, who was in the same boat, different seat. We've heard from Bo, but like, what was your perspective on that final, right? Like you had this incredible heat, as far as like flexing, right? Like, that you've gone from unproven, like you mentioned it a couple times, but leading into it, right? Like we hadn't won anything. We hadn't won a race yet. But I think that, just to help us kind of, put a cap on what's probably gonna be the first part of this episode, like, can you give us the first person POV of like, it's the Olympic final, you're stroking the boat, there's nobody in front of you except Chip. Like, let's if you can, we find it really interesting to hear like what was your take or recollection of that race. I know it goes by in, under 6 minutes, but like, after 4 years of waiting to go to a final again. But yeah, like what was your perspective, man? And like, how did that all play out? I've seen the race a number of times, obviously, just, being a rowing nerd and getting to watch it. But, what was Volp's POV? Like if you can, like put us in the final, put us in the boat.
Yeah. Well, the night before I didn't sleep very well. I was very nervous. I mean, you talk about ramping up pressure, going from not winning a race to setting the world record in the heat and beating the
Yeah.
world championships.
Yeah.
That'll put you
Minor.
on that'll put you on the map real quick and on a lot of people's radars. And so that if I was nervous in the heat, I was like 10 times more nervous for the final. And I think so when we got to the course, it was very hot that day and not windy, not super windy. So it just felt hotter. And so, but I was very nervous. So I warmed up on the erg more than I usually do. I was just getting out nerves and I warmed up more than I usually do. And that didn't help. Like I was like really, really nervous and having a really hard time with it, but not saying anything. I didn't try to let on at all. And so that's what I was mostly dealing with in the beginning
Sure.
of arriving at the course and doing all that. And I didn't know what I was going to do because I didn't know, like, I was like on the verge of like throwing up. And I was like, man, this is going to be, man, this is the most nervous I've ever been. And we do our warm up on the erg and we come back around to the boat bay and Carl Lewis is standing next to our boat. And I'm like, that's Carl Lewis. What the fuck's he doing here? And he had like happened to meet one of our managers and they invited him down and he came. And so he's just looking at the boat, he's standing there and we come over and this calmed me down almost immediately. I went from like being nervous to like not at all. It was wild. He just said hi and then he literally just looked at all of us and he was like, well, ain't nothing to it but to do it now. And then that was it. And I was like, he's right. He's right. That's all I got to do. And then I was like, not nervous. And then we're like back to like joking around, being ourselves, like kind of, having a good time with it. And, we do go through the routines of like getting the oars down and do all that. We get on the water. And I don't know if Bo or anybody else told this story, but we get about a third of the way through the warm up. And I'm like, Chip, I'm warm. And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I'm warm. I'm ready to race. And he goes, fuck. I could just see it in his face. He's just like, what do I do? And so, and this speaks to like the confidence we had in each other, but also like how we allowed each other to sort of be ourselves. And it also speaks to like the confidence the crew had in me, which, says a lot about those guys and the character of those guys and how lucky I am to be able to row with them. But basically Pete asked them, he's like, guys, Volp said he's warm. Are we good to go? And to a guy down the boat, they all just said yes. And so they all cut the warm up short for me and trusted that it was going to be okay. And we just rode over to the bridge that you go under to go the little tunnel to go out under the course. And we watched the women's 8 go by. And then when the official launch went by, we just rode into our lane. We did 1 or 2 starts and then we rode back and we sat there and waited and told jokes and like goofed around. And it was very loose. Made fun of Bo and just did all the normal stuff we do. And so, but what was very fascinating about that experience was you got to see the crews come through the tunnel after their warm up and they all had to see us sitting there waiting for them. And I think that was a very powerful moment in that race where it was like, holy shit, these guys are ready. They're ready to go. And, they all get out there and then they like are like hitting themselves and grunting and like everybody's lining up and doing their little routines. And we're literally telling jokes and very loose and very fun. And it felt like a practice. It was really good. And, the whole game plan was to sort of get out clean, get into the race. And everyone knew that we could sprint. And so we thought that people are going to try to get as much margin on us as they could. And so our goal was to hold them and then as best we could, and then in the second half, make a push in the third 500. And we just, I don't really remember that much. I just remember hearing the buzzer and then the boat just like lifting out of the water. It was like so light. And we were up at a 50 in no time. And like the race was gone, and it was like, but it was, like there was no fog. Everything was clear. It was like you could feel everything. You could see everything. Like it felt like rowing, like you were in a regular practice, like when you're having a really good day. And 600 meters goes by, 500 meters goes by, and Chip looks around and he's like, "They're not moving, guys. Fuck it, we're gonna go." And he changed the race plan right there, and we take this huge push. And if you watch the video, I kind of secretly think Mike pulled the other guys aside and said, "Guys, Volp's gonna want to like go easy in the beginning and like sprint. We're not doing that. You guys are gonna get the lead." Because you watch the middle of that boat, and those guys are going harder than anyone I've ever seen rowing. Like they are dropping bombs in that race in that moment, in that move. And it's like fun to watch it now when I see it, because I really think that's what happened. And then so, we take this big move, and then all of a sudden I can see everybody, and that's like an amazing place to be.
Yeah.
And then we get to the 1,000, and we almost have open water, and Chip's like doesn't know what to say, and I'm thinking to myself, I went out too hard. We're gonna die. They're all gonna catch us. I went out too hard. There's no way this should be happening. That's like all the thoughts are going through my head. And we take a little move, our normal scripted move at the third 500, and nobody moves, and we kind of just hold for that whole 500. But because I had been thinking I had gone out too hard, I subconsciously let the rate come down. And I think we're at like 35 at one point in that third 500, which is very low. I mean, nowadays people would be like, "What are you doing, steady state?" But so then, then I got a little cocky, Then I thought like, "Oh, I'm hot stuff. Maybe we can win this thing by open water." And so like we're coming into our last 500, and like right around 400, I just say to Chip, "Get open." And he made this call to take this move. And I could immediately feel the boat say, "No, not today, big man. We are not fucking this up." And it was like, "Whoa, okay, we're just gonna row this rhythm." and then that's when Bo was like, right after that, Bo just said Dutch. And that's when we looked over and we saw the Dutch were moving. And then we took a little burst in the last 250. And that's when we knew we had it. Yeah. That last 250, I knew I had it. There's no way they're getting through us unless like something catastrophic happens. There's no way. And then at the very end, it was like all of a sudden Chip's in my lap, JR's floating by, and it's just like I'm cussing at him. Chip, like it was just great. And it was like this, like the adrenaline, like you feel no pain. The adrenaline is just rushing through you. It is like that's just amazing. But when you get on the awards dock, what's interesting is all of that is gone, and you just feel like content, like you achieve something, and it's like you can take a deep breath again. And that was a very relaxing moment to feel that like level of contentness at that point.
Hot.
That's amazing, dude.
Damn.
That was a fun one.
Damn.
Certainly.
The funny part is when I yelled at JR on the camera, it looks like I'm pointing at the Canadians.
Yeah.
And I remember having to like call some of them because there was like a little brouhaha in the Canadian media that I was like cussing them out. And I had to call him, tell him I was yelling at JR, and you could see his head little bobbing in the water. And so I promise I wasn't yelling at you.
I remember that.
And then I was joking.
I
I joke around now that I'm like, well, they were too far behind. They couldn't hear me anyway.
Oh, that didn't spike their intensity for 4 years later.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, dude,
that was
that
was awesome.
That was an awesome POV. We've gotten Dan Beery in Bo's POV too. So definitely for the audience, go back and listen to those episodes. They'll tell you their thoughts on that race. I don't want to spoil Volp's narration of that because
Yeah.
it was pretty awesome. But look, I think for this episode, I think that's an amazing capstone. I think, for the audience, what we're going to do is we're going to bring Volt back because there's another Olympic cycle that we're going to talk through, as far as what the process was for 2008 with Steve and Dan. And then I think, there's also life beyond, the national team and where Bryan is now. And I think that's a really fascinating story too. And we're going to get into culinary adventures and all kinds of fun stuff, as well as coaching the national team, right? And coming full circle.
Yeah.
So look, a lot to come in the next episode, but Bryan, like, phenomenal, like,
Yeah,
first
Bryan,
episode, dude. Like, thank
Your-
you for all the narration, man. It was super cool to hear.
No,
your
thanks for
story is
having
like
me.
the Godfather, right? Like, and so we've just done Godfather part 1 and 2.
Part 1, yeah.
And part 1
Okay.
and 2 probably, but we got to get to the point where you're like Michael Corleone and you're like, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in, right? Like, and that's
I
like the
know.
story of 08.
Yep, I can't get away. I really can't.
Can't.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
okay. I mean,
Dude.
I'm, I
We're
love,
glad you're still around.
Yeah, I love the sport. It's too good. Too good to leave.
Hey man, I'm glad you're in it, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I really look up to you, man. I still
Oh.
do to this day.
Dan, I
And,
appreciate that.
I think you're an incredible human being. You're a tremendous oarsman, and I'm really looking forward to part 2.
Yeah, it's
I
gonna
really
be
am.
fun. Yeah.
So on that note, this was Fast Friends. This is with the GOAT, Bryan Volpenhein,
Part 1.
and part 1, and he'll be back. He'll be back. And thank you everybody that's been with us. This is episode number 10 in the can, and we'll see you for the next continuation of the Bryan Volpenheim saga. Good night, everybody.
That's all for today's show. Fast Friends is a Mettle Factory production. All opinions expressed are our own and those of our guests. If you like our show, follow along or subscribe with us wherever you get your content and podcasts. Thanks for listening.